right, hello, Fortinas, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to Ministry Revealed. It is May 16th, 2023. And as we keep watching and praying, we're going to keep diligently seeking as we are fully aware of the seasons and times that we are in. We covered it in the first, 52 minutes of the last video. We know the three places we're looking for. We have this incredible chart, which I spent like an hour today going through with my son, breaking it down. Guys, there's no hiccup in this. The revelation is here in this chart, all the way from the birth of Christ, all the way to the start of the end of days, to the end of days. Oh my goodness, it is awesome. So knowing that, knowing where we are, we're going to spend some more time in Him, diligently seeking. And I think this video is probably going to be along the names of Seeing in the Is to Come. And this video, it's going to be packed. You know, we haven't talked about Hebrews, in the book of Hebrews, in quite a while. And what had happened was our brother Chris in the forum, when you guys hear me, if you're new and you hear me talk about the forum, you can click right here on the website, go to ministryrevealed.com, go to the menu, click on the forum. It takes a few seconds to sign up, and it's free. You can join people from all around the world in there, sharing news, events, prayer requests, the mission in Uganda shares, all sorts of things going on in there, and Bible studies, of course. So our brother Chris had posted a video from a pastor I really like. I've really come to like him. He's just, he's knowledgeable. He has some good understanding, and he's just a really likable guy. So I don't spend too much time watching other videos when they're prophecy videos. You see, this is part of why I was showing this with my son today, so that he's aware again of this season and time. You know, we've gone through many seasons and times over 5.5 years, but nothing like this. Nothing ever like this have we ever been able, to complete. To realize that the end of 70 starts it and the end of 70 ends it has never happened and will never happen again in all of human history. And so I spent this time with my son and going through it because where we are, breaking it down for him and showing him these incredible revelations that we've been blessed to receive, that it's all Spirit-led, but not Spirit-given. We have to be led. We have to do the work. You have to diligently seek and spend some time. Now, do many people, probably even millions of people around the world? Yes, of course. But we have been blessed. We've been given the mission of His revelation that has now taken us from the beginning of Genesis to the end of Revelation, all in the revelation of His is to come, using the was and the is. And this pastor isn't talking about the is to come. He's talking about typologies, and these typologies, though, are the is of the present. So anybody that's hearing this, when you hear me say was and is to come, the was is the Old Testament until Christ. The is the New Testament until the moment of the pre-trib escape, and then starts the is to come. So that's the was, the is, and the is to come. He wasn't talking about the is to come, but he was showing typologies, and you'll see at one point, we're going to share quite a few pieces of it, and we're going to build. You're going to see how it plays out. It's so awesome. We're going to build on what he shows is how Christ as a typology fulfilled something that from the was, he fulfilled in the is. And I'm going to build on his is from the was and add how the was and the is will also fulfill the is to come. The prophetic of what's coming. Because what don't they realize? Well, I don't blame them. They haven't been given the revelation. It's not easy to understand. But the answer is Ecclesiastes 1:9. The thing that has been, was, is that which shall be, is to come. That which is done, the is that which shall be done. So the was and the is both have typologies in the is to come. But what you're going to see and why it's so difficult for them to grasp is because nobody understands that Christ is coming pre, mid, and post. He's coming as the Son of Man. After the escape happens, he's coming as the Son of Man for 40 days. What? If you're new, that sounds absolutely absurd. He's not coming proclaiming himself Christ. He's coming as the Son of Man to warn as Jonah did. When he comes for the great multitude rapture at the end of seals, he's coming on heavenly Mount Zion. That's why everybody freaks out at the end of the sixth seal. But nobody realizes that he's actually coming on heavenly Mount Zion, because they only see 7 years. And so when you only see 7 years, you sandwich it with trumpets of seals and trumpets, and you think it's just the end of tribulation. But it isn't. It's when he comes at the end of seals. So you're going to see this, that as he's going through these things, he can't actually make the jump to associate it to the is to come. Yet you're going to clearly see from the scriptures that the context of the conversation in like 2 or 3 of the places are literally future that haven't happened yet. It's awesome. It's so exciting to do. And because he does such a great job with showing the is that was fulfilled from the was and the typology, I'm going to be able to easily overlay it, showing that the is to come shall be fulfilled again from the was and the is. It's beautiful. And as I get started, I'm going to start with another video. I'm not sure who shared it, but it was shared in the forum. And it was one by John, you'll see who he is in a moment. One of the big pastors, very well known, very outspoken one. And he's talking about the Antichrist and the Muslims and the Mahdi and everything else. And when you see this, as we get started, and you see this, anybody who thinks the Antichrist is Biden or the king or whoever is going to realize that the Antichrist is indeed an Arab. The Antichrist is absolutely unequivocally from the Muslims, just as we've been teaching. And I'm going to show you something as he gets going and he starts sharing on these pieces. We're going to go through some of it to start. And you're going to see him talk about these 3 characters that they believe begins tribulation. And you're going to see John MacArthur, that's it. And you're going to see John MacArthur talk about this guy. But guess what? John MacArthur doesn't go into who this guy is. He can't actually explain who this guy is. The other 2 he can, but he can't explain the one who comes first for a short period of time. It's awesome. Why? Because we have had the answer for 4 or 5 years here now. We know that the Son of Man is coming first to warn as Jonah did during the 40 days of the 50 days that come before the 14 years. It is awesome. And why can't he see it? Because nobody in the church has any clue that the Son of Man is coming for 40 days after the escape of the pre-trib bride of Christ. It's awesome. It is absolutely incredible. All right, so those are the types of things that we're going to go into. And you're going to see this is going to cover a whole range of topics that we know. It's going to cover from is to come typologies. It's going to cover parts of chapters to years, because, you know, the book of Hebrews is one that we've shown in chapters to years that we haven't spoken about in a long time. You're going to see the connections in relation to the revelation of who the Gospels are speaking to. You're even going to see, like I said, the Son of Man and these connections of the timings of when he comes that nobody's been able, you hear them talking about it, but they're not realizing the is to come of it. And you know why? Because it is absolutely impossible to do unless you first understand the revelation, the beginning of all revelation in the is to come. And to start to understand that, there's 2 places you can come. You can come to this playlist right here called the Revealed End Time Study Notes Series, which starts with this 22-minute intro video. So this 22-minute intro video is an overview of these 3 videos to lead you in. But this is still a 30-minute intro Bible study. This is a 30-minute intro Bible study, and then this is a big one. This is all about the revelation that starts with who the Gospels are speaking to. When you realize that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and the last will be first and the first will be last, is Luke, Mark, and Matthew, you realize that the synoptic Gospels are way more than just the similarities of stories and being able to look at it in the is. There's a whole story, there's a whole slew of prophecy within the Gospels that people have called contradictions and differences that are actually prophecy built into the Gospels. One, for example, that I always share, and you'll see in this video, is Jesus in Luke going to the cross was arrayed in a gorgeous robe, which means white, radiant, beautiful, like a bride, right? You see that in Mark, he's arrayed in purple, and in Matthew, he's arrayed in scarlet. Purple and scarlet are tribulation colors. When you begin to understand these things in these Gospels, the synoptic Gospels in the end of Luke, Mark, Matthew open to you, you're going to realize, oh my goodness, how did we not see this? The answer is found in the big video, it's all because of Matthew. You're going to realize that because for hundreds of years we've been taught from the Gospel of Matthew, we never realized the understanding of why we had Luke and Mark and Luke. What was the greater purpose? Why were there these quote-unquote contradictions and these differences within the same stories? It is all for prophecy. And it's amazing because as we get going, we're going to talk about some of these things that have happened in this ministry. And these things that have happened are things that we didn't know as we taught and revealed them. And then we come to find out that these things existed and had been talked about for centuries, or known about even for thousands of years, or a couple thousand years. But we had no idea. And they were all being fulfilled in Revelation here in this ministry. It's incredible. And that's exactly what's going on in all of this. You're going to realize that when you see who the Gospels are speaking to, you're going to realize that the tribulation, then if there's a discourse in Matthew and a discourse in Mark and a very different one in Luke, they must be separate periods of time. And that's absolutely correct. Luke's discourse, which you're going to be able to see by going to this video, the 6th one here, the discourse is revealed. You're going to see that pre, mid, and post are all true. They're all true. That's why people can support them in Scripture everywhere. And it plays out when you realize 40 to 50 day period is Luke's discourse. Mark's is the 7 years of seals, and Matthew's is the 7 years of trumpets. It is absolutely mind-blowing, and it'll be worth every moment of your time. I promise you that. Here's another place that you can go. And let me back out of this. So if you're on YouTube, you can go to the playlist. If you wanted to go to our website, you can go to ministryrevealed.com. You can go into the menu, and I wanted to show you guys a couple things. One, this is now this was a page added just recently. You can get the intro right here, so you can send people to this link and get them to watch this first intro. It's followed by the 3 videos I was just talking about. And then those are the introductions. And then to go deeper, they can go into these bigger studies here. A deep study into the differences in all the Gospels and what they reveal for the is to come. The discourse is revealed, pre, mid, post, all true. The revelation of understanding from Revelation chapter 6 all the way to Revelation chapter 14, the seals and the trumpets. The 7 churches are now revealed in understanding them in the is to come. It'll blow your mind. There's an incredible mystery of what we call the comma and the difference that it makes. It's incredible. I'm telling you, when I told my wife about this video, when I first came across the revelation of it, she laughed her head off because she's like, dude, you can't even remember what you had for breakfast. And here you are noticing a difference with a comma and, or when there's an S on a word compared to no S. You know, it's crazy. And then, of course, we have a real deep one, which is what we call prophecy on another level. And this is where you're going to see something, as you saw right here, this page right here, which is these books in Scripture that, what is there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 books that we've opened. Acts has 2 ways and Psalms has 2 portions that reveal events within their chapters that relate to things in the is to come. And look at what we can do with the was and some of the is. Isn't that what we're talking about? The was and the is both reveal the is to come. You're going to see this pastor talking about it. Even when you see little pieces of verses, they're there to help you connect and see where it relates to in the was. And we're going to take that to another level and relate it all in the is to come. So this is awesome. And then you can go to the big one. This is called It's All a Fractal. This will take you from the creation in the very beginning, to the end of Revelation, and show you that the entire overall creation story of the 21,000 years and the end 22,000 is the beginning of eternity, is the story of the end of days. 21 years, 7 easy that we're coming into the end of right now, then 7 of seals, 7 of trumpets, and then the final Jubilee. It is going to blow your mind. But you definitely don't start with these videos. You need to start with these videos to understand what's taking place here. But now I want to show you this as well, because I was talking about it in the last video. We've now got our mission page connected here. So we have our donate page and our mission page, and I want to show you what the difference is. They're the same page. But if you click on our mission, it will take you to our new page where our brother Jimmy is, and check this out. See this? It's awesome. So we have our PayPal and GoFundMe, the two main sources, or if people wanted to mail something to us. And the reason is, it's for the preaching of the word and giving of Bibles, teaching the revelation and giving the ministry revealed book away, feeding the hungry, clothing the poor, and helping the sick. This happens through the ministry here, throughout the world, but with a focus in Uganda with our brother Steve. And so this is a great, simple page where everybody can come if they want to support, but they can also see what's happening. You see, we actually even get the books printed in Uganda. And it's the generous support of the brothers and sisters here in the ministry that pay for it. I send the money when it comes in to Uganda to get this done. Not only the books, it also covers the Bibles. So there's been over 1,000 ministry revealed books printed and given out so far. See them making them all? There's been well over 2,000 Bibles now given out as well. There's additional workshops, info, printouts, and children books for them to color and to grow in the stories. All happening in Uganda. Check this out. There's our brother Steve right there. So see, preaching and giving out Bibles, giving out more Bibles. Look at this. All these people here, you can see they all have ministry revealed books. This is in Uganda. So they're preaching the word, they're spreading the gospel, and they're giving them understanding and preparing them for the is to come. He works with health programs. They're giving out clothes. They're helping to feed the poor. They're giving blankets to the needy. They're buying clothes. These are clothes that were all packed up that they bought. They're helping with the children. This is our brother Steve right here. You can see him preaching from the ministry revealed book. And he's preaching from the gospel and teaching from the book. You can see them all here with the ministry revealed book with pastors and church leaders. There was one of them here. I think this guy right here in the middle was asking us, I think it was him, asking me to come out, if I would come out to Uganda and spend some time with them. And God willing, maybe in the is to come, right? We'll see what the Lord has planned. This is a bag of shoes that they've given out. And in this picture, second from the left is our brother Steve and those working with him. They had ministry revealed t-shirts printed. I thought that was pretty cool. We never asked them to do it. They did it on their own, I believe, with the printer that they use, the guy that they use. And, of course, Jimmy might have to adjust the wording here. You can't see it. And this is some of our brothers and sisters from around the world. So different parts of the world. See, you got Portugal. You got a Bible study and sisters gathering together. This is me and Jacqueline. She came through Calgary and we met and had dinner with our families. This is me in the middle and Jimmy right here. That's our guy who has done all this beautiful stuff with the website. You can see all of them, right? This is our brother Dave up in Edmonton. That's just north of me. Where else? What are some other places? We got Neil. A couple of our sisters, Petra and Simone from South Africa. What else do we got? Oh, we've got another group of sisters. They help Steve as well, so they send support for Steve as well. They've put together children's books for the children in Uganda with Steve as well. So you see this, it's happening all around. Here's our brother Valerio from Italy. So see, we've got some pictures up there, a few people here and there, just to show it's all over the world, guys. People learning, seeking, and searching, and the word and the understanding and the preparation of the years to come is all happening. So you can find this all here, whether you go to the donate page, which will take you to it in another way, or you can go to our mission. All right, so I wanted to share that with you guys as well. From there, let me go into something. Well, you know what? Let me go into where I was going, what I was telling you guys earlier. I'll sip of coffee. With John MacArthur. This is all about this conversation about the Mahdi and what the Arabs or what the Muslims believe is coming and their leaders and so forth. And I'm sorry if the volume kind of goes in and out. You can always go watch it for yourself, understanding what you already know here in this ministry, because this gets really awesome. Okay? You're going to clearly understand, if you haven't already, that the Antichrist is Muslim, and so is the false prophet. Okay? They believe, as you're going to hear, that who we call the false prophet, they call the real Jesus. They believe Jesus was only a prophet and never died, but was taken to heaven like Elijah. You see, that's why nobody can die for your sins. Nobody can take the place of your sins. They don't believe that his death and resurrection happened. So we know that their Jesus that they talk about has nothing to do with our Jesus. Their Jesus is the false prophet, and their Mahdi is the Antichrist. But the key thing I want to show you guys and want you guys to hear is that there's another guy who the Muslims call the false Jesus, the Antichrist. And this guy that they call the Antichrist, the fake Jesus who's the false prophet, they say is going to kill him. I don't think that he's going to kill him. I think he's going to be gone because it's the end of the 40 days of the Son of Man. But what's awesome is John MacArthur even talks about this, but there is no conversation about who this guy is because it has never been understood by the church, guys. We have it here. It's awesome.
Popular speaker and author Tony Campolo says, quote, "When we listen to the Muslim mystics as they talk about Jesus and their love for Jesus, I must say it's a lot closer to New Testament Christianity than a lot of Christians." Really? So you think that the Muslim Jesus is the same Jesus? I can help you with that, because they describe Jesus. The Muslim Jesus plays a crucial role in Islamic eschatology. Now, you do know that the Muslims have an eschatology. In other words, they have a theology of the end. They know where they're going, according to their writings. They know where they're going. Let me describe the Muslim Jesus to you. This is out of their own writings, the Quran and the Sunnah. The Quran is supposedly the word of Allah, actually the word of Satan, but they think it's the word of Allah. The Sunnah are the words of and the works of Muhammad. The Quran then constitutes their holy scripture, and the Sunnah, sometimes called the Hadith, constitutes their holy tradition. Their theology comes out of the Quran and the Sunnah, just as Roman Catholic theology comes out of the Bible and tradition, or Judaism comes out of the Old Testament and rabbinic tradition. The Muslims have two sources of authoritative truth. In their system, they have Jesus. Jesus was a man. He was not God. He did not die. He went to heaven like Elijah. He did not die, therefore he did not rise. He did not die, therefore he did not provide an atonement for anyone, because no one can provide an atonement for anyone else. He is a man, he is a prophet, he is nothing more. He went to heaven like Elijah, and he's in heaven right now, standing alongside Allah, waiting for Allah to send him back. In their system, this man, this prophet Jesus, who is now in heaven, never having died, plays a key role in the end times, because he will return from heaven without dying. He will come back when Allah sends him back. Now the question to ask is, why would Allah want to send Jesus back? There's a lot of prophets to pick from. Why does he send Jesus back? Answer, so that when he shows up, he can correct all the Christians who have misunderstood who he is. Sources for this again, the Quran and the Sunnah. The great event of the coming of Christ, of coming of Jesus, is so that this prophet, this man who comes back, can straighten out the directed, misguided, misconceiving Christians who think he was God, who died and rose again and provided atonement. He'll come back and straighten it out. And by the way, after he gets here, he'll get married, have children, and die and be buried next to Muhammad. That's the Muslim Jesus. In Islamic eschatology, there are three great signs of the end of history. There are some lesser signs, or some minor signs, and some major signs. In their eschatology, again, quoting their sources exclusively, there are three great signs of the end of history. And each of them is a man. Let me tell you about those three men. First of all, the first man that will come in the end of history is the Mahdi, M-A-H-D-I. Sometimes he's called the 12th Imam. Every time Ahmadinejad over in Iran gives a speech, he says, glory to the Mahdi, glory to the 12th Imam. Every time. He's waiting for the coming of the Mahdi. What is he coming to do? He's coming, listen carefully, to slaughter all who will not worship Allah, convert to Islam. They are identified in their writings as pigs and dogs, and to establish the everlasting, world-dominating kingdom of Islam.
Hello. Pretty obvious, right? It's always been that and the Lord. It's always that enemy. It's always been with the Muslims. It is a Muslim antichrist false prophet.
The Mahdi, or the 12th Imam, that means the guided one, is the long-awaited savior. He is the establisher of the final caliphate. The world must follow him as he takes over, or he will destroy all enemies of Islam. He will come, and he will carry on holy war, and either you convert or you're killed by the Mahdi. He will have an army. His army will be a massive army, and his army will go from nation to nation to punish the unbelievers. The holy writings of Islam say that this army will carry black flags. And on those black flags, there will be one word, and that one word will be the word punishment. By the way,
See? Quite the savior, right? Punishment. Black flag for the time of the Black Horse Rider. Right in that, not that he is the Black Horse Rider, but during the events that we see with death and famine and all that stuff of the Black Horse Rider.
The Iranian army today carries black flags. They want to be ready for the coming of the Mahdi. He will lead the army of black flags first to Israel, slaughter all the Jews, and then he will establish his rule in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. That's what their literature says. Slaughter the Jews, establish his rule on the Temple Mount.
And that's something we know, right? Right off the bat. We know that at the end of the 50 days, when the 14 years begin, that first attack is on Jerusalem that destroys it and removes them from the land.
According to their holy writings, the Mahdi will bring rain and wind and crops and wealth and happiness so that all will love him and no one will speak of anyone but him. Their writings say the Mahdi will come and make, at first, a peace agreement with the Jews and the West for 7 years. The reign of Mahdi lasts 7 years, in which he establishes Islam on the earth. Their holy...
It's kind of interesting with the 7 years. I don't believe even they understand their prophecies, just like the Christians don't understand their prophecies. We're being revealed it in this ministry, right? I believe the connection to those 7 years is the second half of seals and the second half of trumpets. We've talked about it, right? Because Antichrist doesn't really get his power and authority till the second half of seals. Then he's killed and he's brought back at mid-ish trumpets during that time with Satan when the pit is opened, right? So I believe it's probably actually split up into portions, but we know he'll be here during the beginning of seals as well.
Writings say this: the Mahdi will come riding on a white horse, and it even says in their writing.
Now, do I disagree with this? Yes. You see, they think in their writings and everything else that he's coming on a white horse. You see, their Mahdi is coming on a white horse. Hello. So if the Mahdi is the Antichrist, who do you think is the one coming on the white horse? How do we know? You see, we've done teachings on this, right? We know that the white horse rider is actually the Son of Man. We have proven it, we have shown it, and its connection is to Luke's discourse period. You see, because when you get to the red horse rider, when the great sword is given, see, to take peace from the earth, that they should kill one another with the great sword. When you go to the discourses of Mark and Matthew, it doesn't begin with the white horse rider. It tells you in verse 8 of Mark 13, it says, for nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. That all these things, earthquakes, famines, troubles, all these things are the beginning of sorrows. You see, then they'll begin to kill each other. Nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. This is going to begin with the attack on Jerusalem. This attack on Jerusalem, as we know, is going to destroy Jerusalem. They're going to be gone for 7 years, right? So you could say that also is the 7 years of the beast, of the Mahdi. But we know those first about 2.5 years, he's there on the scene, but it's not until he gets the greater authority, which is after about 2.5 years into seals, that he gets that greater authority to continue for 42 months. But you see, it starts at the red horse rider. Technically, did the tribulation begin 50 days earlier at the pre-trib escape and then the 40 days of the Son of Man? Yes. But you see, they believe because what? They believe that their white horse rider, who is the Antichrist, is the Mahdi. So they think he's coming on the white horse. Because why? Because Satan has corrupted it by taking the place of the truth of who the white horse rider is. He is not, the white horse rider is not the Antichrist. His period doesn't come, excuse me, until the red horse rider when the sword is given. Because that's the attack on Jerusalem. Listen to the rest of it. I'll prove it out. Excuse me.
As it says in Revelation 6, 1 and 2. Saddam Hussein, by the way, painted murals of this Mahdi on white horse all over Baghdad. And he comes carrying a sword to kill the infidels. When the Mahdi arrives, he will discover hidden scriptures. He will discover them, interestingly enough, somewhere near the Sea of Galilee. And there will be there hidden scriptures, hidden gospels, and a hidden Torah. And they will be the true scriptures which will be used by the Mahdi to show the Jews and the Christians they were wrong, that their scriptures were the false scriptures. The Mahdi will be a messianic figure. He will be a descendant of Muhammad. He will be an unparalleled, unequaled leader. He will come out of a crisis of turmoil. He will take control of the world. He will establish a new...
See that? He will come out of the crisis of the turmoil. See, after the World War III.
New world order. He will destroy all who resist him. He will invade many nations. He will make a 7-year peace treaty with the Jews. He will conquer Israel and massacre the Jews. He will establish Islamic world headquarters at Jerusalem. He will rule for 7 years, establish Islam as the only religion. He will come on a white horse with supernatural power. He will be loved by all people on earth. If that sounds familiar, that is a precise description of the biblical Antichrist. Absolutely, step by step by step by step. The Bible's Antichrist is their Mahdi. We know that the rider on the white horse in Revelation 6 is the Antichrist. They use that verse to describe their Mahdi. Why am I giving you all this? Because the description of the Mahdi is exactly the description of the biblical Antichrist, the beast of Revelation 13. And you go into any kind of a study of that and you will find that all the details match up perfectly. The Bible's Antichrist is Islam's savior and world conqueror, who establishes a universal Islamic kingdom. And there's a second sign, a second person, and it is Jesus. The Mahdi is not Jesus. The Mahdi is greater than Jesus. And that's important to their system, because if you have somebody greater than Jesus, then the Christians were wrong. So Jesus will return. Yes, Muslims believe that Jesus will come again. They believe in the return of Jesus, not the true Jesus. The Jesus of Islam, not God, didn't die, didn't rise, didn't provide a sacrifice for sin, but he does return. He's a prophet. And he comes back, and he has one purpose when he comes back, and that is to assist and aid the Mahdi. He returns, listen to this, as a radical Muslim. He comes back as a radical Muslim. He will arrive, by the way, at a minaret near Damascus. And he will come back holding the wings of 2 angels who flew him down to meet the gathering army of the Mahdi in the east, the army of the black flags. Jesus, when he comes back, will pray to the Mahdi, who is greater than he. He will acknowledge the Mahdi as his Lord. He will make a pilgrimage to Mecca. He will worship Allah, and thus he will lead all Christians who will follow him to reject their notion of Jesus and accept the real Jesus, who is nothing but a prophet and a man. He will establish worldwide Sharia law. He will become the greatest Muslim evangelist, and he will be the final witness on the day of judgment against non-Muslims. Christians everywhere will affirm that they were wrong, that the gospel is wrong, the New Testament is wrong, he didn't die, he didn't rise, he isn't God, he isn't the Son of God. He himself will come back and point out how wrong we've been. He will correct all misinterpretations and all misrepresentations. Let me quote what their literature says. He will shatter crosses. That's metaphoric for the destruction of the church, a symbol of Christianity being placed in the church. He will kill pigs. He will abolish the tax on non-Muslims because there won't be any living non-Muslims. Can't tax dead people. And then he will do one more thing. He will kill the...
There we go. Here comes the third person. He's going to kill, so the false prophet who they call Jesus is going to kill who the Muslims call the Antichrist. So if everything they have is opposite, who on earth do you think the Islamic Antichrist actually is?
Islamic Antichrist. He will kill the Islamic Antichrist. Then he will die and be buried by Muhammad, but not until he has destroyed Christianity by revealing who he really is. Who is this? You compare what he does to the false prophet in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, 16, 19, 20, refer to the beasts coming out of the earth, the false prophet, who aids and abets the Antichrist. He is, as the Mahdi is the exact replica of the Antichrist, the Jesus prophet in Islam is the exact parallel to the false prophet who aids and abets the Antichrist. One of their writings says he espouses the cause of the Mahdi. He is the Mahdi's executioner. He is the Mahdi's enforcer. He is the Mahdi's prophet. And it is he who kills the Antichrist. And that leads me to the third person. The Antichrist will show up. The Muslims call him Dajjal. He is the great deceiver. He comes to earth on a mule, and he's blind in one eye. He is an infidel. He is a false miracle worker, this Antichrist, this Islamic Antichrist. But you know who he claims to be? He claims to be Jesus, the Son of God.
You see, the enemy, Satan, has preempted with his people the fact that the Son of Man is coming for 40 days, and he has called him the Antichrist in advance, who is coming, who will do signs, wonders, miracles, who will be Jesus, the Son of God. And we know what's going to happen. We know that he's going to be rejected, because not a single person left that is in the church will know that the Son of Man is coming after the escape.
God. He claims to be deity. He will attempt to stop the Mahdi and the true Jesus, but the true Jesus will slaughter him. This is their view of the true Christ. Our Jesus is their Antichrist. Our Antichrist is their Redeemer. It is a satanic counterfeit that is in complete reverse.
You see that? This is exactly what we share. This, he talks about it, but yet he doesn't realize. Why on earth is there this Jesus character, the Muslim Antichrist, here at the beginning? Who is this third person that's supposed to be here? Well, it's exactly as we have shown. It is the revelation of the prophetic differences in the Gospels when Jesus said he would be as Jonah was. When Jonah was a 40-day warning to Nineveh. So shall the Son of Man be to this generation. He was talking about the final generation. Jesus has not fulfilled this yet. It's awesome. We know that he is the white horse rider, because it's not, the sword isn't given until the red horse rider, which is at the end of 50 days and the beginning of the 14 years. It's incredible. Now who is this Antichrist that the Muslims call? They call him the Dajjal. We've shared on it many times. This Dajjal will live for 40 days. Hello. Come on, people. It is true. The Son of Man will be here for 40 days. After the escape and the 7-day wedding, he comes on the 8th day, and he will be here for 40 days, and they call him the Antichrist. If they call him the Antichrist, you can bet your bottom dollar he's the actual Christ. Awesome. You see? Now here was my point in twofold in getting into this, was to show that I had absolutely no idea that there was a Dajjal character that came for 40 days at the beginning of tribulation. I had no idea that the Muslims knew or believed in their writings that there was what they call the Antichrist, who is the third person of the Mahdi and their Jesus prophet. I had no idea. Until what? Until it was brought to my attention after months, even probably like a year or so after the revelation of the 40 days of the Son of Man. You see, this is what I was talking about earlier. This is the ability of the leading of the Spirit in the Word for the revelation of the is to come. Having been given the revelation, I understood it before I even knew it existed. And I understood it through the revelation of the Word. It would have been absolutely impossible, 100% impossible, without first understanding the revelation of who the Gospels are speaking to. How about this one? When the 14 years began, We understood the 14 years. There's above 14 years. Those in Christ, they go to the third heaven. Then there's a second group, the was caught up rapture. That's the group that goes to paradise. You see? Pre-trib, mid-trib, and then what? He returns, feet down on the Mount of Olives. This time he's coming to them. Did I know with this 14 years that had I ever heard of it in my life? Never. It didn't exist. So I thought as like a little catchy phrase, I would call us 14ers. Okay? 14ers. Fourteeners. 14ers. That's what I started calling us as a tagline, because it was the revelation of 14 years. And nobody could say whatever they wanted to about the revelation. We can absolutely 100% unequivocally prove the fact that it is 14 years of tribulation. You see? So it doesn't matter what the church says. It doesn't matter who's come against me for 5.5 years and all these people coming against me. It made no difference. Because if they would simply take the time to seek it and search it out themselves. We've got a whole series, as you saw on the website and on the YouTube channel. They would understand it for themselves. Well, then what happened? About a year later, I get an email about a group of people called the Quadrideciman. The Quadrideciman is a group of people who in the first, second century, so like 100 AD in that time frame, right? 100, early 100 something AD. That was all connected to the church of Smyrna and the early church, who were called the true Christians at the time. Can you believe that? They held to the truth that the 14th day of Nisan was the true Passover. So when the church wanted to move it and put it on a Sunday, they said, you can do whatever you want to do. We are going to stick with the 14th day of the first month when barley is Abib. And they started getting persecuted for it. Along with that and other things, because they refused to submit to what the church was saying, because the church moved it. They were wrong. And these guys ended up getting called 14thers because of their 14-day belief. And they were called the true Christians. And here we were, a group of people unaware of this, that I had been calling 14ers because of the 14 years. Guys, do you understand how impossible? I was rehashing some of this with my son today too. Do you understand how impossible this would be to make up? It's insanity. Make it up for what? So I can be persecuted over 14 years for the rest of my life until the time happens? I had no idea till it was shown to me about a year or so later. It's insanity. What about this one? Then we found out that there were another type of 14ers. And these 14ers are mountain climbers. They climb mountains that are over 14,000 feet. And they call themselves, this group all around the world, travels to the U.S. to go to all of these mountain peaks that are above 14,000 feet. And they're called 14ers. You want to know why that was crazy? Because we found out a couple years after that in Genesis 11, you see that Abraham has two brothers. Abraham, so you got Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. Abraham represents Matthew, Nahor represents Mark, and Haran represents Luke. Almost like not just the whole of these people, but like you could say even the worker portions of them. Abraham is to the Jews. Nahor, his name means snorer. Mark is all about the left behind sleeping church that wasn't prepared for the pre-trib that will be part of the rapture in the 7th year of seals. They're asleep, and his name means snorer. Well, look at what Haran means. Haran represents the Luke group, and that disciple group that will work just like the 14thers who were persecuted during the early time of Christianity, going about proclaiming the word. Listen to what Haran's name is. Mountaineer. What does he represent? Luke, Mark, Matthew. It goes in reverse. And we can even show that it goes in reverse because look at what happens. Haran begat Lot, and Haran died, even before his father Terah, in the land of his nativity in Ur. Who are the ones that are going to be having their necks put on the line first? Well, the 14thers did, you see. Polycarp, who was the head of Smyrna, who was a 14ther as well, he was also on the cross, right? They burned him, but the fire blew away and he wouldn't burn. So then they stabbed him. You see? The first ones to go in the workers of these three are the Haran group. None of this stuff was known before. It's insanity. This is what we're talking about, spirit-led. How about this? The Psalms of Ascent. The Psalms of Ascent, when you go through the Septuagint, is 119, chapters 119 to 133. We'd been teaching in the chapters to years, the 15 chapters that you can do from the early part of Psalms, that you can also do in the later part of Psalms, that relate to the 14th and the 15th year. And I've been teaching on this from early of 2018. I was given an email about 6, 8, 10 months later with a link to something called the Psalms of Ascent. I had been teaching the Psalms of Ascent that they call the Psalms of Ascent, that are 15 chapters that I've been revealing relate to the prophetic is to come of the 14 years in the final 50th Jubilee. I had no idea it was even a thing. What about this? The Synoptic Gospels. You see, Matthew, Mark, Luke, in the end is Luke, Mark, Matthew. I didn't invent the term Synoptic Gospels. The Synoptic Gospels are, so these Gospels, the three Gospels, are referenced to Synoptic Gospels because they include many of the same stories, often similar, in a similar sequence, in a similar or sometimes identical wording. Yeah, and sometimes contradictory because it's prophetic. They stand in contrast to John, whose content is largely distinct. Well, isn't that fantastic? Do you know why that is? Yes, you do, right? Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke is in the end Luke, Mark, and Matthew. It's the in Christ. It's the pre-trib bride of Christ. It's the sleeping church, world, Gentiles grafted in, house of Israel, right? With the Gentiles grafted in. Rapture of the great multitude, and Matthew to Judah when the Lord returns, feet down on the Mount of Olives. And what do we know about the Gospel of John? We've been saying it the whole time that the Gospel of John stands on his own. Why does the Gospel of John stand on his own? Because the Gospel of John has 21 chapters that all in the typologies of John's reveals within it is to come revelation that we have broken down here many times over the years. Did I invent the Synoptic Gospels? Did I know that it was going to break up like this, Synoptic and John on his own? I had no idea. When it began on September 8th of 2017, it started with the revelation of the Gospels, and it started with me and Luke. John had always been left on his own. It was Luke, and then I was looking at Mark, and then Matthew, and it was because at the point I was looking at the discourses. And when I realized there was something different, that began the revelation, the opening of the books of who the Gospels were speaking to. And John was always on his own. Turned out he was a chapters to year revealing the storyline. It's insanity. It's so crazy. Look at this. Remember in John 1, we had in the beginning was the Word, right? So that's like Genesis 1, in the beginning. Then we figured out that 21 chapters of John relate to the 21 chapters of Genesis, the first 21 chapters of Genesis. At the end of the start of the 21st year, right? The end of the 20th to the start of the 21st, we know Jesus is here. He's returned, feet down on the Mount of Olives. And what starts the 21st chapter of Genesis? The promise Isaac, right? And we've showed all the typologies between John and Genesis in the first 21 chapters all along the way. And it starts with in the beginning. And then what happened? Then he became light. And then after he became light, he was made flesh. We realized that it was the actual story of Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. Right? The first two verses. And then verse 3 forward starts when he became light. And this starts the day count, right? Day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you go to chapter 2, and on the seventh day he rested. That's the seventh day. And then what happens? God forms man, flesh. And this began the thousands of years count. What did we come to understand? We came to understand the revelation of 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. That one day, the creation of the days in Genesis 1, is with the Lord as 1,000 years. So to the Lord who was there, it all was one day, one day, one day for 7 days. But if we were there, it would have been as 1,000 years. And then we have that mystery I was telling you about, that comma and revelation, meaning a separate and additional time added. 1,000 years, well, that began at the flesh, is as a day. Which means the 1,000 years that began from the flesh with Adam are to us, because we're living in the time dimension of the flesh, they began the thousands of years, 6,000 and the 7,000th year's rest. But to the Lord, there's still only a day. So in the days of creation and in the thousands of years that we're in, you have 7 days and 7 days to the Lord, or it would be a 7,000 and 7,000. You got 14,000 or 14 days, and in the end is what? 14 years. But then what happened? Then what happened is we got the revelation of what Genesis 1, verse 1 and 2 was about. You know, I had heard of the gap theory. I had no idea. I'd never looked into it, but I had heard about it. It turned out that it relates only to the first 2 verses in the Bible. And these first 2 verses, they call gap theory. They think it explains the billions of years that came before. When in fact it didn't. Just as the light portion begins the days, which is Mark's portion, you see, the days that are like the first 7 years of seals, and then the flesh portion, which is Matthew, which is the 7 years of trumpets, what comes first? The spirit portion. Those who are what? Those who have the Spirit of God, who are the sons of God, the co-heirs with Christ. This is the pre-trib Luke group. And it's given to us by just a little blip. Because even though Luke's portion is a 7 years, the only part that is going to be recognizably different is the 50 days before the 14 years. We revealed and have now revealed this understanding that the entire story is 22,000 years for us looking in the time of flesh. That to the Lord will be as 21 days. And then the final Jubilee, or the final, the final millennial reign is that 21st year, or that 14th year in the typology. And the millennial reign will end the 21,000. This is why the Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters. It is the first 7 easy years, of which 50 is the final piece, the little blip of Genesis 1 and 2. Then 7 days as 7 years, then 7,000 as 7 years of trumpets, and then it's all over at the final Jubilee. Did I know that there was this fractal that equaled, that was the truth and the revelation of the 21 to 22,000 years? I had no clue. It was all revealed through Scripture, and this is the chart that we made for it. It is incredible to understand this chart. We've got videos on it. It's all a fractal. Remember, in that list of videos from the website, then the last one that takes it all the way back to creation, it breaks this down in this storyline for you. It's over the top. None of these things that I have just shared with you had we any clue of. Any. I didn't know there was this difference that would reveal itself in the Gospels. It is Spirit-led. It has been given to this ministry, and we are doing everything we can to share it with the world that will hear it. The problem is we can't make anybody receive it. It is all about the Spirit. It is all about the Lord God's will through Christ Jesus, by the Spirit, by the Holy Ghost, who would open their eyes, open their ears, and circumcise their hearts to receive it. You understanding why we're probably the reason we don't have very many people? Several thousand, sure, and over the years, maybe, 20, 30 plus thousand. The reason why is because there won't be many in the SEALs workers portion. I believe there's only going to be about 24,000, 2 sets of 12. We've shared on this a number of times. I wanted to share this piece to let you guys see and to understand. These revelations are over the top. They couldn't have even been imagined. Because every single one of them came through the revelation of Scripture. And then realizing that they were actual things in typologies of the past. It is absolutely incredible. That's how crazy it is. It's insanity. So what we come to see is the was and the is being revealed in the is to come. All the way back from creation. The entire story of the 21,000 years from in the beginning to the end. And then the new heaven and the new earth starting the 22nd thousandth year. You see? All of that then starting is revealed in a fractal form in the revelation of the end of days. And we don't spend much time at all talking about the first portion. Because that's the portion, that's the last 7 years to when the 70th year of true Israel comes to an end, which I believe is that true Feast of Weeks this year, and we've proven it. Then you've got your 50 days, and then you've got your 7 of seals, 7 of trumpets, and what we call the 15th year, the final Jubilee, is the same as the big picture 22nd. What do you have? You have the Feast of Weeks, and then you have 7 days as the 7 days as 7 years of unleavened bread, and then you've got the 7 days as 7 years of the Feast of Tabernacles, and then the new beginning, the final Jubilee, represented as the 8th day of Tabernacles. They are the 3 feasts to the Lord. The 1 day at the Feast of Weeks, the 7 days of affliction for the bread of affliction as 7 years, and the 7 days to the 8th day of Tabernacles, all days into years. Remember, the 14thers were days, and it's the revelation of the end of days to years. Craziness. Absolutely crazy. I love it, man. Going into real deep studies of all that stuff is incredible, and this was just touching on it. So I hope you guys understand now. The Antichrist is 100% Arab, not even a little whiff of possibility. It's absolutely true. Now, this pastor right here, see, even just looking at him, he looks like a nice guy. His name's Mike Winger. Oh, my goodness. Could you imagine? I never realized how big his subscribership was. Could you imagine having this guy coming to understand the next part, the is to come, with this great insight you're going to see that he talks about in this video, which is the was and the is. And like I said, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to build on all of it in the revelation of how it plays out in the is to come. And let me show you what I'm talking about. The book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews has typologies in the 13 chapters. And those typologies are going to play out in little insights of verses here and there that relate to things that have happened, the things that the was and the is, and our typologies to things we have already understood will take place in the is to come. You're going to see some incredible connections. Remember, like I said, you're going to see places where we're going to be talking chapters to years. You're seeing places in the is to come typology. You're seeing places within the Gospels and who they're speaking to and understanding why it's in a certain gospel at a certain point. It's all telling the same story. I keep saying it's over the top. It's incredible because I don't know how else to describe it. It's that insane. So let's get started with what he's talking about here. His opening story for us to lay out what he's saying.
the book of Hebrews, I think, is one of the most underrated. I shouldn't even say that. I think, in a sense, every book of the Bible is underrated. But definitely Hebrews is underrated even by those who love the scriptures and love the Bible. Like everyone loves Romans, everyone loves, Philippians, but not enough people love the book of Hebrews. The thing about it is, Hebrews gives us like a decoder ring for unlocking the Old Testament. And in our continued series of Jesus in the Old Testament, we can go to a book in the New Testament that gives us tons of types that are there in the Old Testament. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do a survey of the book of Hebrews and using it as like our decoder ring to give us like a list of a ton of types that we find of Jesus in the Old Testament. It's pretty extensive. Hebrews is a 13-chapter book. It actually takes about 40 minutes to just read it out loud. So I obviously can't read every verse in the book of Hebrews. I'm not planning on teaching the book of Hebrews. Good luck doing that in one study. That's not going to happen. What we're going to do is sort of just run through Hebrews, pulling out of it just things that relate to typology. Some of this stuff I've already taught. I'm not planning on reteaching that. I'll just mention it and move forward. And that gives us the ability to kind of jam through quickly. Because we've reached a point in this series, Jesus in the Old Testament, where I can kind of I can just go, what have I not done yet that I should do before I finish this series? And there's only a few things that are on my mind to get done. Because I don't plan on giving you exhaustive everything about Jesus in the Old Testament. Rather, giving you a whole bunch of tools that you can use so that when you're reading the Bible, you're able to see through that lens. So here we go. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1. It says, long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe. Power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs.
All right. Right off the bat, you're going to see how this leads to a couple of things. You see, what you're going to see that he's not seeing is right off the bat, and here we are in Hebrews chapter 1, in verse 2. He hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom he hath made the worlds. Okay? In these last days. This word for last days is literally talking about the last days. You see, the definition is literally about the end of days. Let's go to it. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 1. And let's see this definition, okay? In these last days, look at the word last. The final, the ends of, the latter end. This is all about the end of days. But do you know what the church has done? Because, you see, this is something that we were talking about earlier. And you're going to notice him do this all throughout. He's reading the words, yet he's not realizing the context of what it's saying. And why? Because the church and those who teach the church and have gone to the schools and everything else see everything in the is and in the was. And that's why he's going to do a great job of showing the typologies that Christ fulfilled in Hebrews that are things from the was that he fulfilled in the is. But when you read things like this, in these last days, you got to say to yourself, well, hold on a second. It wasn't the last days 2,000 years ago. So why are we being told the last days? So what happens is it gets read as an is, and they then turn around and they associate everything relating to these last days as the relation to something that already happened, and that the last days is the last 2,000 years. They do that all the time. I've seen many pastors, every time they talk on the last days in this context, they relate it to things that happened at that time, and they say, since Christ, it's been the last days. Well, it's not true. Now, is there context to this, that he did these things? Well, let me show you an example. Let's keep going in verse 3. Who, being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sin, sat down on the right hand of the Majesty on high. Now, did Christ sit down on the right hand of the Father? Has Christ gone to sit down on the right hand of the Father? Well, yes. You see, technically, yes, of course he did. But you got to remember, there's the was, the is, and the is to come. And in the is to come, it's like this, a physical thing, meaning in our dimension of things that have to happen. But in the third heaven, up in heaven, is he seated at the right hand of the Father? I'm sure you could say that. But what about in relation to the yet to fulfill last days prophetic understanding of this? Well, we know that in that sense, in the is to come, he's not yet sat down on the right hand of the Father. We know he hasn't. We can prove it out. It even shows us, in fact, even in 1 Corinthians 15, that he would then sit down on the right hand of the Father. And as we get going into this and we go further into it, you're going to see for yourselves that in the prophetic, he has not yet sat down on the right hand of the Father. Yet in this context, in reading it in the is, in a typology of having fulfilled the was, it would appear that, yes, he's sitting down on the right hand of the Father. But like I said, as we continue to go forward in this, you're going to completely see that, in fact, I don't even think it's possible that, and we've said this many times, when you read things and you have your end time eyes open, and you could read and see and understand these things in the is to come, it's sometimes hard to realize that when you read many of the things in Matthew, it's like, oh my goodness, so much of Matthew didn't actually happen yet. It is just loaded with prophecy. And we've proven it out. But in the is, did really most of that happen? Yes. But there is more prophetic laid into that than even the other Gospels. Because it's a relation to something in the is to come of trumpets. And so it's the same thing when we're reading about him sitting on the right hand of the Majesty on high. You think, okay, well, he after he did all this and he went up, he's seated on the right hand of the Father. Of course, I know it happened. But there is still another typology in the is to come of this that needs to take place. And you're going to see what we're talking about as we go further and further into this. Because we can see that he is seeing in the was and in the is. But it's like they have blinders on, right? And it's not something that I don't blame them for it. It's not anybody's fault. It's just that they do, right? That as we go and we see these things through the video, and you see this more clearly in the is to come, we know that it's a gift that we've been given. It's a revelation for preparing a group of people, as I said earlier, that I believe are being prepared to work. So let me see here. I made a couple notes. Break it down. And like I said, you'll see what I mean as we continue to connect this and go forward, because I don't want to go through every single chapter to year. All right, I don't want that would devastate the time for you guys taking this through every single chapter of Hebrews. Okay, so I wanted to open with that opening scene of Hebrews, because we're seeing this context already about the is to come. Let me see if there was something else. Right hand on the stools. Okay. Now let's go to Hebrews 6. We're going to jump forward in this now. We're going to go to the 26-minute mark, because at this point here, you're going to see a whole bunch of goodies come out that he starts talking about that in relation are so mind-blowing. When you see them in the prophetic, you're going to say it's awesome, because he's already taken care of the is and the was for us. We're going to overlay the is to come within it.
That too. He suffers our weaknesses. He suffers our afflictions to identify with us, have pity upon us, of course. But there's 2 points here. That the high priest was taken from among men. We already talked about that. And then number 2 is that he did not take this honor to himself. He didn't claim it. He didn't say, hey, I'm showing up as the high priest. So this is from Exodus 28:1. I'll read it to you now. It says, then bring near to you Aaron your brother and his sons with him from among the people of Israel to serve me as priests. Aaron and Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar. What's interesting is this is one verse in the Old Testament that says that Aaron was to be taken, quote, from among the people of Israel. Now Hebrews is playing off that one verse to say that that relates to Jesus, because Jesus came among us. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This means that when you're looking for typology, you can find one little connection in a verse, and there can be a legitimacy to that. We're not trying to fabricate things, but that's what the Scripture does.
You see, this is exactly what we talk about doing. These guys are aware of it. Teachers like him are aware that you're going to find little excerpts of verses. And a little excerpt is going to lead you to a revelation that's connected in the was. This is what he's talking about. And then we take it a step further, understanding the Gospels and who they're speaking to, and understanding the chapters to years, we can understand in the prophetic where it's going to play out.
Now, some would say, well, the New Testament authors were just totally abusing the Old Testament. Like, Jews didn't read the Bible like that. The truth is that when you read literature from the first century and around this time, the Jewish writers would take way more liberties with the Bible than the book of Hebrews ever does. The authors of the Gospels and the New Testament, they were much more conservative in their treatment and how much they were willing to, like, say, get from an Old Testament passage than, say, some of the authors of their time. So that's just good.
Exactly. So see, you would find other writings and apocryphas and so forth, and they gave much more detail, talking of things of the is and the is to come, and they would give much greater detail in how they were typologies of the was. But a lot of the New Testament writers, like he said, you're only going to find little pieces. And that's exactly what we talk about within this. You're not going to read the entire chapter in the vast majority of cases and say the entirety of that chapter is really the is to come. It's verses within it that we know from the revelation of the Gospels and the and the years that are to come, that which little verses within it are the things that give the insight of the is to come. And right in there, you're already seeing, excuse me, he's talking about Melchizedek. Okay, so let's go to chapter 6 of Hebrews. Now, when we go to chapter 6 of Hebrews, so this relates to what? This relates to that time frame of the end of the 6 years of seals. Okay, so where's Hebrews? Right here. Okay, directly related to the time of the 6th year of seals. Sometimes within the chapter, you're going to find things that maybe relate to earlier in the year, throughout the year, maybe insight into the right near the end of the year. Okay, because we know towards the end of the 6th year of seals, the Lord comes on heavenly Mount Zion, which is precisely why at the end of the 6th seal, it's not every seal is 1 year or every trumpet is 1 year. But by the end of the 6th seal, it's the end of the first 6 years of seals. And who do we see coming? Here comes the Son of Man, right? The Lamb, right? Hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath has come. We know this is the Ezekiel 39 war. We've shared on it, talked on these things many times. So we see him there coming at the end of the 6th, and in the chapters to years revelation of the is to come, we have this Hebrews chapter 6. Now look at what happens in Hebrews chapter 6. He doesn't go into this, and it's a very touchy subject, but it's going to be connected right to the end. You're going to see it. Okay, right to the end. It's literally going to take us to the end of chapter 13 of Hebrews. And the wording that you're going to see at the end of chapter 13 of Hebrews is directly related to what's being said here. What is the end of the 13th year of Hebrews? It's the equivalent of the end of the 6th year of trumpets. And we know something, quote unquote, again is going to happen. And we know who he's going to do it for, and we know to an extent why, who that group is. And it turns out that it's right towards the end of the entire chapter, the entire book of Hebrews, in the 13th chapter. But at the end of the 6th year, in that time frame, he's talking to a group of people. And you're going to see who this group of people is, because if you go to Revelation 7, what do we know happens in the 7th year? Well, we know the Lord is here. We saw him at the very end of the 6th seal. Now for the 7th year of seals, the Lord is here. And who's the first group that he meets with in the 7th year of seals? Right after, right? Revelation chapter 6, the end of the 6 years. Soon as that's over and everybody's freaking out and hiding, what's the very first thing he does? They seal the 144,000. Hello. They're sealing the 144,000, and the 144,000 relate to the priestly line. They are also priests, okay? They are the Levitical line. So look at what happens. look at what is spoken about here in Hebrews chapter 6, in the context of being when they see him coming, when the world sees him coming at the end of the sixth seal. They don't all see him, but they see this thing coming and they're freaking out. Right? He's coming in the clouds, like Mark's discourse. He's in the clouds and he's coming on heavenly Mount Zion. Listen to what it says from verse 4 to 6. He says, for it is impossible for those who were once enlightened, okay, and have tasted the heavenly gifts, and were partakers of the Holy Ghost, and have tasted the good word of God, and the powers of the world to come. Okay? Is this anybody? Is this any believer in Christ? No. It's a specific group of people. It's a group of people who will have been given powers and abilities, having tasted heavenly gifts, partakers of the Holy Ghost, tasted the good word of God and the powers of the world to come. You see, they were part of having these powers. Well, something happens to them, or at least to one of them. It says, if they, okay, could be one or several of them, if they shall fall away, to renew them again. You see that? To renew them again. Look at this one time. To restore them again unto repentance, seeing they crucify to themselves the Son of God afresh. What does it mean? To re-crucify. To do it again. And put him to an open shame. Do you think this is just a warning saying that, these people who have these powers and these abilities, that, don't do it, guys, because then you're going to put them to an open shame. You don't want to do that. Or do you think it's probably there because something is going to happen with one or some of these people that are going to cause, or that are going to fall away, even though they've tasted these powers? Well, guess what? Why on earth would Jesus go and get crucified and die again? Why on earth would he do this for this group of people? Wouldn't it be like, sorry, you've fallen away. Too bad for you. But no. He has to do it again. Why? Because this is a priestly line group of people. Let me show it to you in Luke chapter 10. In Luke chapter 10, it says, when the 70 were returned again, he sees Satan as lightning fall from heaven. Now, Satan might not be that lightning. It's like a star fall from heaven, right? Our brother Yanni has some info on this. But it says, you see, they returned to the Son of Man again. So this is the time of about mid-trumpets is the typology here. And it says, and he said unto them, I beheld Satan fall as lightning. Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. Does this sound like a group of people that's being given power and authority? Tasted the good things of the power of the Holy Ghost? Notwithstanding, in this rejoice not, that the spirits are subject unto you, but rather rejoice because your names are written in heaven. Who are these people? You see them in Revelation 14. Here's the 144,000 again. Where are the 144,000? Well, hello, on Mount Zion with the Lamb. You ever wonder what the 144,000 are doing on Mount Zion with the Lamb? If trumpets are still taking place, about to take place? It's because he's returned on heavenly Mount Zion in the clouds. And what happens to these guys? They were sealed, right? Verse 1, Revelation 14:1. And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him the 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. You see what happens? There's a group of people, the 144,000, in the end of seals, and that will begin trumpets on heavenly Mount Zion with the Lord and go out from there as priests during the time of trumpets. You see, they're not the seals workers as the Smyrna 14thers were. These are the 144,000. And they're sealed with God's name on their forehead. This is why Luke said, rejoice not, right? Rejoice not that you have these powers and these abilities, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. So when we're reading this in Hebrews, you realize that something's that's going to take place, that he's going to have to die again for a group of people who have already been made partakers. So why would he have to die for them again? Because they've already been sealed with God's name. They cannot be left. They are already sealed. You see, we're in this time of this time frame of the end of seals, in that final 7th year of seals, and he's going to talk about this some more. Let's keep going here. Now back into this chapter and see what he's going to be telling us next here. Let's go. Oh, we'll continue from here.
Good to know. Okay, next it gets into Melchizedek. Now Melchizedek is an incredibly detailed type, really, really detailed. It's mentioned in chapter 5. Then chapter 6 goes on, it kind of changes subject, goes into a warning about rejecting the ultimate message, the gospel. But there is some typology in chapter 6, verses 18 through 20. So,
okay, he's going to go into chapter 6, verse 18 through 20. Okay, 18 through 20. I want you to catch this. He's going into the end of the 6th, Hebrews chapter 6. And he's going to get into a place here, starting in 18, that is in direct correlation to this understanding. This is the type of thing that I was talking about. That guys like him who have been to the schools, the seminaries, that are teachers and or pastors, and have real good detailed understanding of the Old Testament and connections in the New, if we could get somebody like him, or like the Perry Stones of the world, to see this revelation of the is to come revealed here in this ministry, they would help us open up so much more by showing other typologies that we haven't yet understood. And with every one of these findings, we come to see greater and greater detail in the is to come. And what we're going to focus on for a bit is when he gets into verse 18 and he says, who have fled for refuge to lay hold upon the hope set before us. So let's read all of verse 18. That by two immutable things, which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have a strong consolation, who have fled for refuge to lay hold upon the hope set before us. So this is a good thing. This is about a refuge, a people group being taken into the camps, going into a place of refuge. Okay? A group having escaped, if you will. See, this fleeing away, but it's not the pre-trib. Okay? It's about a group going to the rapture. But in the context of the context is completely different about a person type that's protected. And wait till you see it, because in the old, it was a protection for something. Wait till you see the connection in the time frame. It's going to blow you away. In the it's this refuge where a group of people get to be taken to. And there's a hope for others to go there. Let's read verse 19. Which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which entereth into that within the veil, whither the forerunner is for us entered, even Jesus, made a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. When is Jesus actually going to fulfill this period of time as the high priest of the order of Melchizedek? Well, we could say, well, Jesus is the high priest and king, right? But did he actually fulfill it yet? Can you say that he is in the spiritual sense? Yeah, absolutely. But has it actually happened in the physical yet? Absolutely not. You see? Jesus didn't go into the temple behind the veil, right? The high priest who was there at the time did. Listen to this context. Now remember, it's a context talking about this 144 group that is being sealed, that if these people are about to taste of these gifts and these blessings being sealed, if they fall, there's going to be a re-crucifying. We see that Christ is now going to be the high priest, right? The Melchizedek high priest, which we know is the end of seals to begin trumpets. And there's a group going to a place of refuge who will be protected there until something happens. Listen to this.
I'll come back to Melchizedek in a minute, but verse 18 through 20 of chapter 6, we come back to typology in Hebrews, and it says, so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we have fled for refuge. We who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. And I love this passage. This is like Easter eggs in movies. You know, Easter eggs, apparently in one of the Cars movies, there's like a billboard or a poster for a different Disney film in the background of remember which one it was? The Incredibles. I guess The Incredibles is like in a poster in one of the Cars movies. That's just an Easter egg. You know, you notice it or you don't notice it, but obviously it's on purpose. Obviously it was deliberately there because there's a connection between these two different things. So we get this in different films. We have this.
Okay. So what he's talking about right here is he loves this verse right here because of this little Easter egg hunt of this little portion of a verse that takes you to a context in the was. And wait until you see the overlapping of what the is to come is.
Here, in a sense, in the book of Hebrews, it says we fled for refuge that we might have hope in Christ. Well, the idea of fleeing for refuge is an Old Testament concept that has special importance. And it comes from something called the cities of refuge. We can read about them in Numbers 35. I'll give you a second to go there if you want. Numbers 35, verse 10. So the cities of refuge were these special locations throughout Israel. There were 6 of them in total. And these 6 cities of refuge, you would flee to them if you accidentally killed somebody, accidental manslaughter, and someone was going to try and kill you, you could flee to this city of refuge and you could be safe there. Well, let's read the passage. Numbers 35:10. Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall select cities to be the...
Right off the bat, let me pause it there and let's go to Numbers chapter 35. You see, when's the last time you've seen me go into Numbers? Very, very rarely. I've maybe in a couple of times in videos over the years. So where does he say it starts? Cities of refuge, okay? So he goes to Numbers 35, verse 10. Speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, when you be come over Jordan, into the land of Canaan. Do you remember what happens, guys? What is chapter 6? What is chapter 6 related to? The end of the 6 years of seals. The Lord coming on heavenly Mount Zion. What happens in the 7th year when the Lord is now here as Melchizedek, high priest and king? Do you remember what happens, guys? Let me show you what happens. Okay? Remember this? Let's go to one of our favorites, Zechariah chapter 6. What happens in Zechariah chapter 6? We have the anointing of who? Of Joshua, okay? And Joshua, see, it says in Zechariah 6 verse 11, take the silver and gold and make crowns and set them upon the head of Joshua, the son of Jodak, the high priest. So the high priest, who is the Melchizedek type, who is high priest and king, who we know is going to share it with the branch, who is Zerubbabel, right, as the 2 witnesses, who are coming at the end of the 6 years of seals, Jesus, Yeshua, the high priest, which we also know from Numbers chapter 13, when we had Osi, who is Hosea, who is the son of Nun. Moses changes his name from Osi the son of Nun to Osi the son of Nun, who is Yeshua. Changed his name to Joshua. And then we see in Zechariah, the typology in the chapters to years, the end of the 6th year, and we get all of this info about him becoming the high priest and king. Do you remember how it relates to Deuteronomy as well? That at the end of Deuteronomy, Moses dies. Moses wasn't able to take them over into the promised land. So who shows up, or who gets to take them over? Moses dies, and then we go to Joshua 1. And in Joshua 1, it's the typology of that 7th year of seals. And it's Joshua who's going to what? Joshua chapter 1 verse, look at this. Joshua chapter 1 verse 1. Joshua the son of Nun. Verse 2. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give unto them, even to the children of Israel. Here he is taking a little portion of a verse from Hebrews chapter 6 in the direct correlation to the end of the 6th year seals, in that start of the 7th year seals time frame. When the 144,000 are sealed, there's a priestly line of which he is going to be the high priest over. He is the one, the typology, who is going to take them in to the promised land. And it turns out that this pastor teacher, I'm not sure if he's a pastor or a teacher, shows us that the context of this is in Numbers chapter 35, and he starts in verse 10, when they come over the Jordan into the land of Canaan. So awesome. But that's still only the beginning.
To be cities of refuge for you, that the manslayer who kills any person without intent, so accidentally, may flee there. The cities shall be for you a refuge from the avenger, that the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation for judgment. There's like this delayed judgment. The manslayer here could be a family member of the person he killed going, I'm just going to get revenge. And God's like, no. You've got to have an actual court case. There needs to be law and order here. And if the guy's innocent, here's the situation. He stays innocent of intent. He's swinging his axe, and the axe head flies off, and it hits someone, and they die. More modern days, it might be like someone's backing up, and they hit somebody, and they die, and it was like unintentional. Maybe it was even, maybe there's some wrong there, right? Certainly the event is wrong. But in this case, they would flee to the city of refuge. So they fled for refuge. And that's the reference. We fled for refuge. That's the term that we're getting in Hebrews.
See that? So this is that term that he then goes to talk about when you get down to verse 28 even. Because he should have remained in the city of refuge until, oh yeah, we'll get to there in a second. So as he continues to go into this, he's talking about these cities of refuge. And these cities of refuge, there are 6 cities in the Old Testament that were cities of refuge that were the Levites, that were the priestly line from among the camps. And they had to set up, when they crossed over, they had to set up these 6 cities of refuge in case there was an accidental killing, right? Somebody accidentally killed somebody, and the other person wants to take revenge on them. They would flee to these places of protection. That is what he's talking about, is the context of that verse. That they're allowed to go into these places. Well, what is the context of the period of time, not having killed somebody, but what is the context of the rapture? The great multitude rapture. Those who will be fleeing into Jerusalem, those who will be taken into the rapture in the typology of the is to come, into the rapture, going where? To Jerusalem. Going to heavenly Mount Zion, and when the temple then is going to be rebuilt, and they're in the land and they're protected and so forth. Right? They're in paradise on heavenly Mount Zion. That was seen coming down. That was the stone that became a great mountain. Well, it gets even crazier better.
Numbers 35:28 says this about the guy that flees to the city of refuge. Here's how it works once he gets there. For he must remain in his city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the manslayer may return to the land of his possession. There could be no ransom. Like he couldn't give an offering to get out of the city of refuge. He'd hide there in the city of refuge, which was populated by Levites, by priests. It was a Levitical city because they had these cities that belonged to Levi. And so he stays there, and he can't leave until the high priest dies. And
Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Listen to what it says in verse 28. Because he should have remained in the city of his refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the slayer shall return, listen to this, into the land of his possession. What? Do we know a period of time when the Melchizedek, Jesus high priest, is coming that for a reason may have to die again for a priestly portion, person, or group? Hello. And that after his death, when it's all over, when is it all over? It's over at the end of the sixth seal, when the second woe is past, and the seventh trumpet, the 14th year, is about to begin. As soon as the trumpet is sounded, the Lord will be seen as lightning coming from one end unto the other. What ends up happening when all of this stuff takes place after the Lord has returned? Those who were brought into the wilderness, protected when the Messiah is cut off at mid-trumpets, are brought back what? Into the land of their possession. It's over the top. I told you, this gets crazy. Because we know that the high priest is going to be Jesus Melchizedek, and that he's going to have to what? Die again. And after his death, he can, the person in the reference can then what? Return unto the land of his possession, and the revenger can't get him. Are you kidding me? You see, then he's talking about there's no sanctification. See, in verse 30, Numbers 35, verse 32, and you shall take no sanctification. Okay? There's no ransom. There's no redemption price that can be made during this time. You see? There's no sanctification for him that is fled into the city of his refuge, that he should come again to dwell into the land until the death of the priest, which is the high priest. Verse 34, Numbers 35, last verse, 34. Defile not therefore the land, which you shall inhabit, wherein I dwell. For I, the Lord, dwell among the children of Israel. What do we know the high priest Jesus Melchizedek is doing during the time of the first half of trumpets? Dwelling in the land as high priest and king. This is exactly the context, exactly as the one who is going to take them over into the promised land, who is Joshua, the high priest, the Yeshua type, who becomes high priest and king, and will share the power with the branch, who is the one who is rebuilding the temple. And it's going to be what? The council is going to be of peace between them both. So awesome. So awesome. Watch this. He's gonna continue. I'm just trying to remember if it's on that next part. Okay, we'll go. Trying to think. 33, 32, 50. All right, let's keep going here now.
And we have what? We have fled for refuge into Christ. We've in our city of refuge. And what has given us our freedom from the sins that we've committed, whether they be unintentionally or whatever? Jesus' death. Here we have this amazing, beautiful.
You see that? So he's taking that little piece of context, relating it to the was, showing how Christ fulfilled it in the is, and we're overlaying it from the is of what he's sharing to the was of what he's sharing, and overlaying it to show the revelation of the is to come. It's the exact same context.
Thing that if you just read the Old Testament, you might go, what is this about? But when you see it with Christ, it goes click and it makes sense. In Numbers 35:32, it tells you a little more detail about these cities of refuge. It says, you shall accept no ransom from him who has fled to his city of refuge, that he may return to dwell in the land before the death of the high priest. You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of the one who shed it. Except somehow, the blood of the high priest is going to make it okay, because the blood is the life. And so when the high priest, he goes back to death, he goes from dust to dust, so to speak. His blood somehow makes it okay. The land is cleansed, and he can go free. Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting? It's very interesting. You see? The was and the is, and we're overlaying the revelation of the is to come. Awesome. Because you got to remember, during the second half of seals, when Satan is cast down, and the pit is open, and Antichrist returns, and the false prophet is there, it is hell on earth. That's the expression. Hell on earth is coming at about the midpoint of trumpets for 2.5 years. Until what? Until the Lord agains. And his again is the final cleansing. Because the high priest must die before they can what? Go back into the land of their possession, their inheritance. It's insanity. Well, you're going to see this. Watch this with Melchizedek. Melchizedek, we've shared in a number of places. Well, you're going to see as we go into Hebrews chapter 7, where we're going to go into next, you're going to see now, there he is. So he was there from the end of the 6th year of seals, now starting the 7th year of seals in the typology of Hebrews 7. It starts off with the story of Melchizedek. Well, what happens when we look at our chapters to years? Okay, Hebrews chapter 7, there's Melchizedek showing up. Okay, he showed up right at the end of 6, and he's there, and it's the story of Melchizedek in chapter 7. Well, what happens if you go into chapter 14 of Genesis? Check this out. When you go into Genesis chapter 14, it's the very first instance of Melchizedek. Are you kidding me? In the chapters to years, because Genesis is the big picture one, the 21 chapters like John, and what do you find? Right next to Hebrews, Melchizedek shows up the very first time. And you want to see what's cool about this? Check this out. Chapter 14 of Genesis starts with the story of Abraham who rescues Lot. You want to know why that's interesting? Remember what I said, that it was Abraham, Nahor, and Haran? And Haran died first, right? Haran died, and it was Haran that brought forth what? His son was Lot. Who's being rescued here in chapter 14? Which is the equivalent of the 7th year of seals. The Lot portion. The Lot portion. The ones that Haran, quote unquote, died for. Right? His portion, his kinship, his lineage. And the bride and the workers that are remaining, the remnant bride, the seals workers, are the first fruits of the wheat, which is the great multitude rapture that comes later. They're dying. They're putting their necks on the line for it. What happened with Haran? He died. And then we see now Lot being saved. And then as Lot's being saved, bang. We now get the story of Melchizedek showing up. And Melchizedek as high priest and king. This is everywhere. These typologies, these connections are all over through the revelation of the Gospels, through the revelation of the open books, through the revelation from creation. We have shown these things over and over and over again. Let's continue with what he's talking about, because you're going to see as it gets into the other portion, as we said, when he now goes into Hebrews chapter 7, I want to make sure where I'm going. See, I've shared a lot of these things without actually clicking to it. All right, so it's going to be all the way over there. So he's now going to talk about this portion, like I said, that's talking about Hebrews. But in a moment, let's just see what else he has to say.
And interesting. I think this is a picture of Christ. To take it a step further, which I'm not going there, but someone else did. I'll just read it to you what they said. This is a commentary called the Commentary Critical and Explanatory on the Whole Bible. That's the name of the commentary. This is what they thought about the cities of refuge, because they were just analyzing the names of the cities, these 6 cities. So they said, Kadesh, this is one of the 6 cities. Kadesh it means holy, and it implies the holiness of Jesus, our refuge. Shechem, that's the 2nd city, it means shoulder, and we get that from Isaiah 9:6, the government shall be upon his shoulder. Hebron, that is fellowship, believers are called into the fellowship of Christ. And Bezer, that is a fortress, Christ is so to all who trust in him. He is our refuge and our fortress. Ramoth, that is high, for him hath God exalted with his right hand. And Golan, that is joy, for in him all the...
Okay, so you have these meanings of these cities here that mean holy, shoulder, fellowship, fortress, high, and joy. Again, this picture, if you will, of all these things taking place. So let me fast forward it again, and we're not going through every single detail of all of it. Let's go forward a little bit to where he's now going to talk about going into Hebrews chapter 7.
More on that later, but chapter 7 then gets into this Melchizedek Jesus typology, and you cannot debate this. Like, Hebrews 7 is clearly saying Melchizedek is a type of Christ. Some people say he's actually a Christophany. I don't personally think that that's what the passage is saying, but I made a case for that in my video on Melchizedek and Jesus, and I'll put the link for that in the description. So chapter 7, verse 27, let's jump down, because if I was to cover Melchizedek, it would be the whole night just on that. So he has no need, like those high priests, Jesus, he's not like the other high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once and for all when he offered up himself. For the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests. But the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who's been made perfect forever. This word of the oath is Psalm 110. Right? God has promised, he's made an oath, I will make you a priest forever, or you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. So that's the oath. And it comes after the law that there's this other priesthood, and there's a whole theology there that's in chapter 7. But the point here is that Jesus, he's the once and for all sacrifice, because he's perfect. There's no need to sacrifice for his own sins, and there's no need to repeat anything for the sins of others one time.
There you see, he goes in to say that there's no need to repeat, but he doesn't go into Hebrews chapter 6. At no point does he go into that at the beginning of Hebrews chapter 6, because people have not understood the context of how or why it could ever be possible that Christ would ever have to do something again. And there is no way to see it in a 7-year tribulation from the eyes of Matthew. Because even if you believe in pre-trib, there's still no Christ coming down until he comes feet down on the Mount of Olives at the end. You see, they're going to miss the understanding of him coming when he comes for 40 days. They're going to think he's the Antichrist. And when he's gone after 40 days, they're going to be like, oh, I didn't know the Antichrist was only here for 40 days. So then who was it, right? Because it was Christ. And then when he comes at the end of seals, how do we know he comes at the end of seals? Well, he's coming on heavenly Mount Zion. Mount Zion isn't the Mount of Olives. And when he comes on Mount Zion, they're going to start rebuilding the city and the streets, and he's going to be the high priest and king Melchizedek. He's going to be the replacement Aaron, the one who is greater than Aaron, because he's the Messiah. You see, he's taking that position of Aaron as the high priest, but the greater one as Melchizedek. Why does he end up, why is the reference even in here? Look at this. So in Hebrews chapter 7, you even see the account about Aaron. Here it is right here. In Hebrews 7, verse 11, about halfway through, it says, what further need was there that another priest should arise after the order of Melchizedek and not be called after the order of Aaron? You see, because the order of Melchizedek is greater than the one of Aaron. Why would the one of Aaron be greater, do you say? Well, let me show you. In Numbers chapter 20, this is all about the again that people have never caught on to. In Numbers chapter 20, starting in verse 10, so verse 10 and verse 11. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock. Okay? So the rock is a type of Jesus, right? It's the typology of Jesus. And he said unto them, hear now, you rebels. Now, what did the Lord tell him? He told him to speak to the rock. And he ends up striking the rock. So it's him and his brother Aaron. And he starts putting in his own words that the Lord never told him. He starts doing his own thing that the Lord never told him to do. And it says, hear now, you rebels. Must we fetch, so he's saying we, him and his brother, must we fetch water for you out of this rock? You see, he's starting to get a little pride in there, right? And so Moses lifted up his hand with his rod and smote the rock twice. What do you think that represents? It represents exactly what you think it does, exactly what we've been talking about. One of the strikes was Moses, and the other one was a representation as being from Aaron, because he said, must we do this? The first Moses strike was reconciled by the Lord when he died for all. When he died on the cross for the sins of the world and took them all away. What was Aaron, though? Aaron was the high priest. Aaron was over the priestly line of the Levites, like the 144,000 in the end of days. Who is Christ going to be leading? The 144,000 as the Levites in the end of days. Who was the one that caused the second strike? Aaron. And Aaron was the high priest. And it just so happens that we are now here in Hebrews in the story of the high priest as Jesus, as Melchizedek, high priest and king, who is the one greater than Aaron. We see that the high priest is going to be the one who must die before the reconciliation and they could be brought into the land of their promise. Who is he dying for? The priestly line. He is not dying for all the Jews and all the Gentiles and everybody else again. He has died once and for all for sin. He's going to have to do it again because there is a group of people of the 144 during this time who were sealed and cannot be left. You see these guys in John chapter 15, 16, 17, 18, because Jesus says that his Father gave this people unto him. John 15 starts what? The beginning of trumpets in the typology. This is what's happening here. Okay, let's keep listening to what he's saying.
One sacrifice, that's it. Job's done. There's an interesting combination.
Okay. Now, as we keep going, you're going to see this. You know, he started talking about this order of Melchizedek and the connection to it being to Psalms 110. So I want to take this a little bit further. I think he's still going to talk about Psalms 110. And you're going to see another one of these perfect contexts where he's reading something that is clearly future and he kind of senses it, but he doesn't see it. Because you're going to see that he has a sense of seeing it, of knowing there's something there, but he can't tie it together. And you know why he can't tie it together, of course? Because if he were to tie this together as something that's going to take place, then it would mean Christ is coming before he returns feet down on the Mount of Olives. And nobody in the church is able to understand that there are other coming times of Christ before he returns feet down on the Mount of Olives. Because for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years being taught from Matthew, they all think it's only at the end of 7 when he returns feet down on the Mount of Olives. So let's listen to a few more, a little bit further into this, and hear what he says.
In here. Because we have the high priest as typology of Christ, but then we have a prophecy of something greater in Psalm 110. Right? Melchizedek.
You see that? Let's listen to that again.
The link for that in the description. So chapter 7, verse 27, let's jump down, because if I was to cover Melchizedek, it would be the whole night just on that. So he has no need, like those high priests, Jesus, he's not like the other high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once and for all when he offered up himself. For the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests. But the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who's been made perfect forever. This word of the oath is Psalm 110. Right? God has promised, he's made an oath, I will make you a priest forever, or you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. So that's the oath. And it comes after the law that there's this other priesthood, and there's a whole theology there that's in chapter 7. But the point here is that Jesus, he's the once and for all sacrifice because he's perfect. There's no need to sacrifice for his own sins, and there's no need to repeat anything for the sins of others. One time, one sacrifice, that's it, job's done. There's an interesting combination here because we have the high priest as typology of Christ, but then we have a prophecy of something greater in Psalm 110.
You see that? You have the typology of Jesus, right, as the Melchizedek, but you have a prophecy of something greater in 110. So he knows that the typology of the is of Hebrews 7 is a direct relation, to Psalms 110. So you've got the was in relation to the is. But when he's in the is relating to what Christ has fulfilled, and he takes it back to the was, he knows that the was has something still greater in it that's prophetic. But he can't quite make the connection.
Right, Melchizedek. It's when you take Jesus that the entire Old Testament comes together and makes total sense. It's that it all clicks. And that's the idea of Jesus in the Old Testament, is seeing what's already been embedded there, the meaning of it all.
Okay, so let's go, excuse me, let's go to Psalms 110 and see why he understands, like anybody who reads this, if you have any Bible study, you're going to read this and understand that there's something greater that's taking place here, which is greater than what Jesus already did in the typology of being the high priest when he was here the first time. Because what you have to understand, guys, is that when Christ was here the first time, did he actually fulfill the Melchizedek high priest and king? No. In a spiritual sense, yes, that's the way we're always taught it, in the spiritual sense. He was the high priest and king. That's what the is of the scriptures are telling us. But the literal? No. Do you understand that if he had fulfilled this literal, the Jews wouldn't be blinded and they would have recognized him? I'll get to that in a moment. Psalms 110, starting in verse 1. The Lord, Father, all uppercase, right, said unto my Lord, lowercase, right, Jesus, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. You see, right off the bat, we're seeing a prophetic is to come, but in the is, was Christ already seated after he finished and went and he's at the right hand of the Father? Well, it would appear so because that's what the scriptures were telling us. But here we're coming to a prophetic was that he's tying into in an is, but this is more prophetic of yet to be complete, is the greater prophecy within it. It's like I said, when you go to the Gospels and you go to many things in Matthew, people try to say, well, this was done and this happened and this happened. No, it didn't. There's a whole bunch of things that were actual prophecy. And that's what's going on here. They're pointing to it because he was the Melchizedek type. He did go to sit at the right hand of the Father. But as he said, but there's a greater going on here that's prophetic. And it starts right off with, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. So where do we get this in the prophetic within the Gospels? We get it from the Gospel of Mark. The end of the Gospel of Mark is the end of the time frame of seals. And this typology of him appearing to this group is the typology of him showing up to the 144 at the end of the 6 years of seals to the start of trumpets. Okay, to the start of the 7th year of seals. And it says, and after he sat with them, he unbraided on them, see, because they didn't believe the testimony of the seals group that was already there working. That's the typology going on. Listen to what he says, verse 15. And he said unto them, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, and he that believes not shall be damned. Okay? So these are the things that they're going to go out and do during the first portion of trumpets. And it says, and these signs shall follow them that believe. In my name they shall cast out devils, and they shall speak in new tongues. Do you know what this is a reference to? This is a reference to Acts chapter 2 in relation to it pointing to the end of seals. They're going to be going out and they're going to be speaking in new tongues and doing these things because this group is the group that's going to help the seals workers bring in the rapture group, because there's not enough workers. That's why these guys are sent out. And when they finish that part, they finish helping bring in the rapture group, then they're going to work during the first half of trumpets. And after the first half of trumpets, like we read in Luke chapter 10, what does he have to do? He sees Satan fall like lightning. Well, at about mid-trumpet, Satan is cast down, and I believe it's more, like I said earlier, it's probably the reference of the star. Satan is cast down. And we saw that at that point, they return. Messiah is going to be cut off at that point, and he tells them because he saw Satan be cast down, and what does he do? He gives them greater power and greater authority. That's directly related to verse 18. Look at what he then says in verse 18. They shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. See that? We were reading about that in Revelation. The exact same storyline is what we were reading from Luke 10 to Mark 16 to this group that is sealed, and they're there on Mount Zion in Revelation chapter 14. They shall lay their hands on the sick, and they shall recover. You see that? Now listen to verse 19 and 20 of Mark 16, the end of Mark. This is the end of seals time frame. So then, after the word of the Lord came unto them, he was received up. This is a typology of the rapture. Into heaven, and look at this, and sat on the right hand of God. Luke doesn't say this. Matthew doesn't say this. Only Mark does. And Mark's typology is to the end of seals, with the 144 being sealed first, the great multitude raptured coming in, and then look what it says. Now he sits on the right hand of God. The right hand of God is when he comes as Revelation chapter 12, verse 5. When he comes in Revelation chapter 12, verse 5, what do we see? Watch this. In Revelation chapter 12, verse 5, the exact same time at the end of seals, it says, and she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up. You see, there's the rapture. So you have him coming at the end of seals. He was to rule all nations. The 144 are going to do that. And you've got the rapture of the great multitude. What happened in Mark 16? When this happens, it says, then he's now seated at the right hand of the Father. So in this context, when we go into Psalms 110, let's look at that exact same context. Verse 1, halfway through, said, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. Psalms 110 now in verse 2, the Lord Father shall send the rod of thy strength out of Zion. Rule thou in the midst of thine enemies. You see the problem that comes? Where he's realizing there is something greater prophetically in the context of this Melchizedek portion we're going to get to, when he's going to be ruling with the rod of iron, right? Or he's going to send out his rod, which is the 144, while he rules in the midst of his enemies. How on earth is he going to be ruling in the midst of his enemies if when the Lord comes is only returning feet down on the Mount of Olives and establishes the millennial reign? Peace on earth in the millennial reign, the promise to all the Jews, right? Isn't that an issue? If he's coming to rule to rule in the midst of Zion, there's a problem there, isn't there? You would have to submit that, wait a second, the Lord must be coming at some point before he returns at the end of tribulation to rule and reign for 1,000 years. Because it says he's got a portion where he's going to do it in the midst of his enemies. Let's keep going to verse 3. Thy people shall be willing in the day of thy power, in the beauties of holiness. From the womb of the morning, thou hast the dew of thy youth. The Lord Father has sworn and will not repent. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. When is he the high priest after the order of Melchizedek? At the very end of the 6th year of seals, and begins it in the 7th year of seals and into trumpets, just as Joshua, who took them into the promised land, and is anointed as high priest and king, the son of Nun. Craziness. Verse 5 and 6. The Lord at thy right hand shall strike through kings in the day of his wrath. You see, when he comes at the end of seals. He shall judge among the heathen. He shall fill the places with dead bodies. He shall wound the heads over many countries. You see that? Wound the heads over many countries. Because when the Lord comes at the end of the 6th year of seals, at that 7th year time, it's the Ezekiel 39 war. We know from Daniel chapter 7 that only the Antichrist is killed. Oh, many will die in the battle. Millions and millions and millions will die in the battle, coming to attack and destroy what they see coming down. And out of the leaders, though, out of the kings over many countries, the 10 kings, they will have their dominions taken away, but their lives are still prolonged. Same with the false prophet. Only the Antichrist of all the leadership is killed. When? When he comes as high priest and king. Do you understand how Zechariah was showing at the end of the 6th chapter, when Joshua, Yeshua, the son of Nun, becomes priest and high king? And then you've got Zerubbabel, who is the branch, who is going to be the one taking care of the rebuilding. It's so awesome. Do you understand when you can see and you can understand these things? It is so clear. It's just in our faces. So we're now able to see when he's going to sit in the prophetic is to come, as he already has. There's a prophetic is to come when he's going to literally do it when he comes at the time frame of the end of seals. It's awesome. So incredible to be able to see and understand. Let's continue just a little bit longer in this portion.
Then in chapter 8, and again, I'm just surveying to give us an idea of how pervasive typology is throughout the Old Testament, but also in the book of Hebrews, because then it, again, legitimizes this whole adventure of finding types. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 1. Now the point in what we are saying is this. We have such a high priest, one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, a minister in the holy places, in the true tent that the Lord set up, not man. True tent.
I love it, man. It's so fun. It's so fun because, guys, this is what we keep saying. This is happening here in this ministry. It is the revelation of the Lord's is to come. Do you understand? The entire word, the entirety of Scripture is Christ Jesus the Word. Remember what we showed in John chapter 1? In the beginning was the Word, right? It's the Spirit portion. Don't you find it incredible that the Word being revealed in his revelation that took us all the way back to in the beginning of the Word is revealed through a group that is connected to a worker portion that is part of that in the beginning portion related to Luke? Do you think that's just by chance? Do you think it's by chance that we're 14ers and there were 14thers? Mountain climber 14ers and the third brother represented as Luke being a mountaineer? It's this stuff, it doesn't make any sense. How could this be? It is the revelation of the Spirit leading, guys. Listen to chapter 8 and how we started. Where's chapter 8? Well, it's the beginning of trumpets. It's the beginning of trumpets. What happens now at the beginning of trumpets, now that the Lord is here? When the Lord is here, it's the beginning of trumpets. So we're going to see what it says in parts of Hebrews 8, and then we're going to go look at Zechariah chapter 8. Okay? Look at what he was saying. Hebrews chapter 8, starting in verse 1. Now, of the things which we have spoken of this sum, we have such a high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary, the true tabernacle. What was the Lord coming with? He's coming with paradise. He was coming with heavenly Mount Zion. Do you know that when you go to the chapters to year of John, you go to chapter 14, which is the equivalent of the 7th of Hebrews, the Lord is what? The typology is the Lord is coming with heavenly Mount Zion. He's coming with paradise to take the rapture group into paradise. And what does he tell them in John chapter 14, starting in verse 2 and verse 3? He says, in my Father's house are many mansions. He's talking about paradise. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go and prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. This, in the chapters to years, John, who stands alone in the revelation of the 21 overall years, is telling, Jesus is telling us when he's coming for the rapture group, which will take place in the 7th year of seals. They're going to paradise. It's part of the kingdom of God. The group that goes first, that's going to the third heaven, they're going to the throne room area, right? They're going to the portion with the Father, which is also part of the kingdom of God, like the inner court compared to the outer court. It's all the kingdom of God. The Jews, their promise is the kingdom of heaven. And it's the kingdom of heaven on earth. That is their millennial reign. You see? That's why Matthew has the kingdom of heaven everywhere. But church will tell you, the kingdom of heaven, they'll interchange it with the kingdom of heaven and kingdom of God. It's not true. They're different places. So what do we see happening here? He's talking about the throne. He's talking about the laying out of the tabernacle. You see? Seeing that there are priestly gifts, that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law. And you see all this context of the temple and things relating to the temple. Watch this. What do we know about this time in its relating, in this talking about stuff relating to the temple? Well, if we go to Zechariah chapter 8, which is the same time frame as Hebrews chapter 8, look at what Zechariah chapter 8 says. See, now the Lord is sitting on the right hand of the Father, and there's a rebuilding that's about to take place. Look at what it says. Thus saith the Lord, Father of hosts, I was jealous for Zion with great jealousy. I was jealous for her with a great fury. Thus saith the Lord, I am returned to Zion to dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem shall be called the city of truth, and the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. Do you know that this is the word right here for the root word that comes from Haran? It's awesome. So, what ends up happening here? He's talking about Mount Zion. He's there on Mount Zion. That's not the Mount of Olives. And look what he starts telling them. Zechariah 8, verse 9. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, let your hands be strong, you that hear in these days, by the words, these words, by the mouth of the prophets, which were in the day that the foundation of the house of the Lord of hosts was laid, that the temple might be built. Verse 10, for before these days, there was no hire for man, nor hire for beast, neither was there any peace. You see, when peace is taken out by the time of the red horse rider and peace is removed, we know the 7 years of seals take place, which is why when you get to chapter 8, it's the beginning of trumpets. It says, to him that went out or came in because of the affliction, listen to this, red horse rider, for I set everyone against his neighbor. That's the red horse rider. Peace is taken out and he sets everyone against his neighbor. So he says that's why there was no building, there was no reconstruction, no things taking place in relation to rebuilding the city and the streets and the temple. Only the foundation will have been laid during seals. What are we seeing? In Hebrews chapter 8, a conversation of things relating to the tabernacle and the temple. Well, it continues and it gets even better. Watch this one. This one's going to blow your mind. We're still in Hebrews 8, which is the context in the is to come of the beginning of trumpets.
What is that talking about? Yeah, this is like the true tabernacle, which the Lord set up. This is so that the tabernacle itself is a shadow. It's a foreshadowing. And there's the true that comes. The more real things are the things that we read about in the New Testament, actually. So the previous tent is superseded by the true tent, just like the previous priests are superseded by our ultimate high priest, Jesus.
And will be superseded by him coming on heavenly Mount Zion and the temple, and superseded by him being the high priest of the Psalms 110, when he sits finally at the right hand of the Father, ruling and reigning in the midst of his enemies.
Priest after the order of Melchizedek. And this should have been obvious when they looked at the tabernacle, right? Like these aren't angels. These are woven images on cloth. Like we don't think that there's real. These aren't real angels. This is like gold covering, wood or whatever. This isn't like, this isn't the final thing, right? This is all representative. It seemed representative even at the time of its making. It was representative. Christ comes and he does the real thing. But what we're saying though from Book of Hebrews is that just as the tabernacle was only representative of something greater, so the high priest was only representative of something greater, so the sacrifices were only representative of something greater. It's consistent as you go across all these things. Then in verse 3 of chapter...
Awesome. Let's go to 41 minutes and 45. And we're going to get into verse 6 of Hebrews 8.
Where am I now? All right, verse 7. It's tough having 11 pages of notes. So now we're going to talk about the covenant. Verse 7, for if that first covenant had been faultless, the first covenant would be the covenant with Moses at Mount Sinai, where God gives him the Mosaic covenant, we call it. There would have been no occasion to look for a second, for he finds fault with them when he says, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. So that the fact that there's a new covenant prophesied in Jeremiah is to say that some...
I told you it's going to get better. What is Hebrews 8? The Lord is there, Melchizedek, on Mount Zion. The rebuilding's going to take place. And what do we know the Lord does when he comes right near the timing of the start of the 7 years now of trumpets, at the end of seals to the start of trumpets, represented by chapter 8, the beginning of trumpets? Listen to what he says. It starts in verse 6. But now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. Watch this. Let's keep going. Verse 7, and we'll keep going down through 9 of Hebrews 8. For if that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second. For finding fault with them, he said, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant, listen to this, with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them out of the land and led them out of the land of Egypt, took them by the hand and led them out of the land of Egypt, because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, saith the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord, and I will put my laws in their mind and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them a God, and they shall be unto me a people. Now, let me ask you this. When Jesus came, was Jesus the new covenant? Of course he was, right? We know he's the new covenant. But is he the one prophesied here? He was the new covenant in the spiritual sense. But was he the new covenant when he's writing in the hearts of Israel? Look at what it said in verse 8. When it said, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah? Are the Jews not still blinded? Are the Jews not blinded? You see, when will the Jews no longer be blinded? When is this actual covenant going to take place? Well, isn't it interesting that it's Hebrews 8? It's at the end of seals to the very start of trumpets. How do we know that Christ is making a new covenant at the beginning, at the end of seals to the start of trumpets? We can prove it from a few places. Let's go to Zechariah chapter 11. First of all, we know he's there on heavenly Mount Zion at the beginning of trumpets. He's established it now, right? Look what happens in Zechariah 11. This is mid-trumpets when Satan is cast down. What does the Lord have to do? He sees it gets crazy. And it says they're going to eat the flesh of another. And then Zechariah chapter 11, verse 10 and 11, which is mid-trumpets, right? So if we go here to Zechariah, we see this brings us to the time of mid-trumpets. And there's a reason why I'm showing you this, because we can see a point in which the covenant is going to be broken again. Listen to what it says, starting in verse 10. And I took my staff, even beauty, and cut it asunder, that I might break my covenant, which I had made, listen to this, with all people. And in verse 11, and it was broken in that day. You see that? And it was broken in that day. This is the prophetic is to come. You see, we can even show it in Daniel chapter 9 from a further angle. So this is about mid-trumpets, which means there had to be a point at the start time frame of trumpets when he shows up that he would have made this new covenant. And I'm going to show it to you. Here we go in Daniel chapter 9. We've taught on this many times, and again, just recently spoke about it. You see, you got the 7 weeks of 7 years of seals, and then you've got the 62, which is about 3 years and 2 months, right? We'll say about 3.5 years. And it's while the wall and the streets, right? The temple is being rebuilt until the time that what? Messiah is cut off. He's cut off in the 11th year, between the completion of 10 and the 11th year being complete. In that 10th year, he's being cut off. This is the point when Zechariah 11 is saying when he broke his covenant at that point. Messiah has to break it because Satan's being cast down. It's the end of a generation, the 70 to 80 and then soon. And look at what happens in the final year. He's going to what? Confirm. It is Jesus who is going to confirm and prevail to confirm the covenant that he had already made 7 years or 6 or so years earlier, but that he had to break in mid-trumpets. So we could see when he renews it, like when he returns at the end of the 6 years of trumpets to the 7th year of trumpets. That's why it's 1 week as 1 year. He's going to confirm that covenant. And we see at mid-trumpets, at the time of his cutoff, when he has to break that covenant related to in Zechariah 11. But now, let's go back to Zechariah 8. Remember what Hebrews 8 just said? It said when he will make the covenant, when he will establish the covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Well, here it is, the beginning of trumpets now starting. The Lord is there on Mount Zion. He's going to gather them, let their hands be strong because they're about to rebuild. They couldn't rebuild because for 7 years they were removed from the land. Well, listen to what it says. Verse 13. Zechariah 8, verse 13. The exact time frame related to Hebrews chapter 8. And it shall come to pass that as you were a curse among the heathen, O house of Judah and house of Israel, so will I save you, and you shall be a blessing. Fear not, let your hands be strong. Hello. See that? It's not only the house of Israel here, but it's also the house of Judah. Which means when the seals come to an end and the rapture group has come in, it means Judah, the Jews, the house of Judah, are going to recognize something that is going to cause them to also go back into their land. Do you realize what that is? These things we've taught on many times. You realize what that is, right? Let's go to what he starts talking about in Jeremiah, and let's tie in this exact point. You're going to hear him now reading from Jeremiah 31. And you tell me, well, I guess it's rhetorical, but you can tell me if you want, even in the comments. When we get to Jeremiah 31:31, this is the context of what he is telling us is taking place here in relation to the new covenant from, I don't want to go back to it, but the new covenant that is being spoken about in Hebrews chapter 8. The place he relates it to is Jeremiah chapter 31. Okay? Let's listen to this for a little bit more, for, well, just under a minute actually. Listen to this.
Something's not working with the old covenant. What was not working? Was the covenant flawed? No, the covenant wasn't actually the flaw. It answers that question in verse 8. He finds fault with them. It's the people who failed the covenant. There needs to be a covenant that doesn't require us to be perfect. And that's what Jesus gives us. Verse 9, not like the covenant I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, for they did not continue in my covenant, and so I showed no concern for them, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws into their minds and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. That's a quote from Jeremiah 31, and the timeline, right? So here's Abraham.
You see? He's telling you it's the quote from Jeremiah chapter 31. All right? So, give me 1 second here. So we go to this quote, and let's go to what it says in Jeremiah chapter 31. Starting in verse 31. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, Father, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. When do you think this is going to happen? It was in Hebrews 8, and the prophetic is to come with the house of Judah and with the house of Israel. Can you tell me that the covenant has already been made with the house of Judah? Then why do they reject him? Why do they not see him? Why are they blinded? Why did the Lord blind them? So that we could come in, right? But we just saw in Zechariah chapter 8 showing that they're already there, which means the rapture group comes in, but there's something that the house of Judah, that the Jews will have recognized at that point, that will also cause them to go back home. Listen to what it says. Continue in verse 32. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which covenant they break, although I was a husband unto them, saith the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my law in their inward parts and write in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. Listen to this. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor, every one his brother, saying, to know the Lord. For they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest. Can you say this has happened? No. There is still the prophetic understanding of this in the is to come. Do you understand? Again, this connection. Do you guys remember, as I was showing this, also showing that the house of Israel and the house of Judah are both in Jerusalem at the time of the start of trumpets? Do you see? This is what the entirety of the world of church has missed. Because they don't know who the Gospels are speaking to, and everybody's eyes come from Matthew, they think the 7 years of tribulation are just the 7 years of Judah, of which the temple's going to be rebuilt, but it's going to be the Antichrist. Then the Antichrist is going to step in, and they think that the Jews are going to fall for the Antichrist who's going to rebuild the temple. But it's not the Antichrist rebuilding the temple. It's the Zerubbabel and Messiah, the high priest King Zerubbabel. They're the ones there, and the 144,000 being sent out. That's when the rebuilding is taking place. That is precisely what you're reading in Zechariah chapter 8. They're not going to fall for some Muslim Antichrist. The Antichrist is going to be destroying them and destroying the Christians who refuse him. Why on earth would the Jews go to be with him? It's absurdity. You see, it's this confusion, because if you don't understand first who the revelation of who the Gospels are speaking to, which will lead you to the revelation of the years, there is absolutely no way to understand that these portions of time are separate and that the Lord is here when the rebuilding takes place. So why then are the Jews suddenly there? Why would the house of Judah now be making their way back and be in Jerusalem when the Lord is there on Mount Zion and the rebuilding starts? Why did the Lord suddenly now make this new covenant at this time? You following? Do you know that the reason the Jews were blinded was for us, right? For the house of Israel that were mixed in with the Gentiles. They were blinded for us until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Well, at the end of seals, the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. At the rapture, it's over. And what happens? Do you know that the Jews, some of the reasons that the Jews say that Messiah wasn't their Messiah was because there were prophecies that he hasn't yet fulfilled. their Messiah, who is the true Messiah and our Messiah, he is going to defeat their enemies that came against them, and he's going to be here at the time of the rebuilding of the temple. And this is why the church says, you see, they're going to fall for the Antichrist who's going to rebuild. But they're not. The church hasn't seen the first 7 years that removes them from the land after destruction first. And they think that the second 7 years that they see is really the whole of tribulation. And so they've got the Antichrist who's from the seals portion. They've now got at the beginning of seals when really it's Messiah. So the Jews are waiting for a conquering king, high priest Melchizedek conquering king, to come and destroy their enemies that came against them, and who will then rebuild the third temple. This is why you see the house of Israel there at the same time that you see the house of Judah there at the same time with the house of Israel and the Gentiles that were brought in. Because when Christ comes at the end of the 6 years of seals and in that 7th year of seals and destroys all of the enemies as he's coming on heavenly Mount Zion over Jerusalem, that is what they're looking for. The one who will come and conquer all of those who destroyed Jerusalem, who will all come against them as the Ezekiel 39 war and destroy their enemies, will be established in Jerusalem on Mount Zion, and the rebuilding of the city and the streets, letting their hands be strong, because now the rebuilding is going to take place. This is why the Jews have been blinded for us, that when the end of seals comes and he destroys all them who destroyed them and removed them from the land so that the land could rest as he said it had to do, when he then returns and destroys them and he's there on Mount Zion, they're all going to make their way back from these places that they were hidden from and fled to and everything else. You see? And the ones that were captives, they're all going to go to Jerusalem because their conquering King Messiah is the one they were waiting for. They just yet didn't know for our benefit. They were blinded so that we could enter as well. I told you, man. It's off the hook awesome. Incredible, incredible, incredible stuff. Let's keep going to, let's go to 46. Okay, here's just a little excerpt, a little blurb that he talks about in Hebrews 9. So we're getting close to being done. So in Hebrews 9, he gives this little excerpt here, because we're not covering every chapter, right?
Then chapter 9, it talks about the symbolism of the tabernacle, which again I did a whole video on as part of the series, and I'll put a link in the description for that. Verse 6 of...
Okay, so you see that? What he's talking about here is he says now in Hebrews 9, you have this whole conversation of things that are taking place in relation to the tabernacle, the temple. Because what's happening during this time, in equivalent to the chapters to years? The temple's being rebuilt. It's being rebuilt during the first 3 and about a half years of trumpets. So then you got this conversation of everything going on connected to the rebuilding. Let's go further now. Let's go to 48 in a bit.
You don't want to do that. Like, you're not allowed, because the way has not been made. Because this is all insufficient, and Christ is sufficient, and that's the idea. Verse 10, but they deal only with food and drink and various washings, regulations for the body imposed until the time of Reformation, meaning that these things are not imposed now. But when Christ appeared...
Here, you see that? Until the time of Reformation. Let me show you this one. This is another awesome one. Okay? Chapter 9, verse 10. Okay, there's the Aaron's rod. It's so awesome. And it says in verse 10. Let's go 10, 11. So, which stood in meats and drinks and diverse washings and cardinal ordinances imposed on them until the time of Reformation. Another word only used one time. When does the Messianic Reformation take place? You see, it is the Messianic restoration. When does it come? It says, but Christ being high priest of good things to come. When has he become the high priest of good things to come? When he is the Reformation. Do you remember when he becomes high priest? At the end of seals. At the end of seals to the beginning of trumpets, he is now high priest and king. It is the time of the Reformation and the restoration of the King of Israel. Do you know that we've proven that? It's in the book, but we have it in the video of the 7 churches of the end of days. You see, there's the Old Testament typology, there's the New Testament typologies, all playing out events that have played out over thousands of years. And then there's the end of days reference of the 7 churches and what is played out over the was, over the is, in the is to come. These things have played out over thousands of years. They're going to play out in typologies over 14 years. That's why the end of days is going to be a crazier time than at any point in human history. And look at it. What is the reference to the time of Reformation? Sardis. You see, this is the beginning of the 50 days. This is the beginning of the 40 and the tribulation starts. This is about mid-seals time when the mark portion of fleeing into the wilderness, when Antichrist gets his power. Thyatira, they're living in the wilderness till the end of seals when the Lord comes. It's a dark time. They're still in the wilderness from when Antichrist got his power. And when the Lord comes at the end of seals, it's the typology of the Reformation. And it becomes what? The period of Israel's kings. Well, isn't that amazing? This is when Messiah becomes what? High priest and king. It's awesome. You see, if one or two of these things connected in this entire video, you could say, oh, maybe Alan's understanding something here or something there. When everything is connected, you would have to be absolutely insane to think this isn't the revelation. This is the revelation, guys. We know exactly the connection to the timing and the understanding of the Reformation, of the timing of the Reformation when he becomes high priest and king, which is from the end of seals to the beginning of trumpets. Craziness. Absolute craziness. Okay? Let's keep going. Let's go now, jump ahead. We'll go to chapter 11. He doesn't really say much here. He doesn't go into it, but let me, I think there's a little point that I wanted to make here. He says a little something that's really good.
Totally can't do that today, right? Chapter 11 is the Hall of Faith, and I think it's a Hall of Typology. I actually made a list of all of the guys that are in there, and I did.
That's right. So, you know that Hebrews chapter 11, right? He calls it the Hall of Faith, the Hall of Typology. What do we know about Hebrews chapter 11? We don't really need to cover it again, do we? We know this by faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death, that the Lord is a rewarder. What does it cover? That's the pre-trib escape of the bride of Christ. Then you have Noah being warned, and it's the typology of the 40 days of Noah, and it relates to what? The seals workers and the Lord there with the Son of Man right there, who the Muslims called Dajjal when he's here for 40 days. That's the typology. Then you have what? By faith, Abraham was called into inheritance, and what is he looking for? Listen to what it says. This is when they come in at the end of seals. And it says in Hebrews 11 verse 10, for he looks for a city which has foundations. You see, the foundations were laid during seals, and when they come in, as we saw in Zechariah 8, they're going to rebuild the city, the streets, and the temple on the foundation. And that's why he was looking for the foundation. You see that? And then it goes into Sarah, and Sarah being delivered of a child. This is in relation to what? When he returns, feet down on the Mount of Olives, them having not received the promise. And what do you see? Who is the promise? It just so happens to be the beginning of chapter 21 of Genesis. Chapter 21 of Genesis, which is a direct correlation to the end of the sixth year of seals to the beginning at the sounding of the seventh trumpet. You see, it's the exact same timing as what? Zechariah chapter 14. What's the connection? The Lord coming, the promise coming, feet down on the Mount of Olives, returning, destroying the enemy, and their promised millennial reign coming. Awesome, awesome stuff. Okay, so we've showed this, so we don't need to spend much time in there. And now we're going to go into, as it closes out here, with Hebrews chapter 13, and he starts in verse 11. Let me see this first here. I got a little note. 101:47. I got a little note to play from here for a few seconds. Let's see what he says.
Pretty cool stuff. In fact, hopefully what you're seeing is Hebrews all about typology. It's not the
There you go. You see, hopefully what you're understanding is Hebrews all about typology. That is the revelation of the years to come. Everything we reveal is a typology and connecting it from the very beginning of Genesis to the very end of Revelation. He understands this with Hebrews and is able to take it through, but he doesn't yet have the eyes of as we said, just as the church doesn't. And he even talks about this. He's one of the rare ones who can go into these books and show the typologies of what Christ fulfilled in the is, in the revelation of the is, taking it back into the is to come. And we're the ones who could take it from the was and the is and reveal their understanding in the is to come. All right? So now let's go to 107. See, we're almost done, almost done. And it's Hebrews chapter 13, starting, I think, verse 11.
Is relate to Jesus. It's the specificity of it that really enamors me. So Hebrews 13, verse 10, it says, we have an altar from which those who serve the tent have no right to eat. There's a good chance that those who serve the tent here are the worshipers who would come and bring offerings to the tabernacle or to the temple. And they have no right to eat. In other words, there's some sacrifices in Leviticus that they're not allowed to eat. It's fully burnt. It's fully destroyed. They can't partake of it. They can't eat those things. And it's saying, hey, we have an altar from which you guys aren't allowed to eat. There's this thing that you can't get through the Old Testament law. None of those sacrifices will do for you what Jesus does for you at the cross. But we partake of Christ's sacrifice, which is of a different priesthood. It's a better priesthood. Another way to put this is that we're all priests, the scripture says now. Under our high priest, we're all priests. We're partaking of this thing because the priest could partake.
He's not quite getting it, but he's getting it, right? He's got this application of saying, well, we're all priests now, but really, it's a specific group in the end of days who are the priests, you see, during this time of trumpets, which is this context of period of time to the end of the 13th year of tribulation, which is to the end of the 6th year of trumpets, when something is about to happen again, and he's relating to this group of priests who he, the Son of Man, is Melchizedek high priest over during the time of seals. I mean, during the time of trumpets.
Partake sometimes of sacrifices no one else could. So it could be referring to how the worshipers couldn't eat certain things the priests could. There might be a parallel that's there, and now we're entering in. Verse 11 of chapter 13, it says, for the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy places by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. In Leviticus, there's a sin offering. When you bring a sin offering in particular, you take the body of the animal and you burn it outside the camp. That's one of the rules. So Jesus also suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his own blood. This is saying there's a parallel between the specific details of specific sacrifices and what Jesus did in his sacrifice for us. And the detail is the body's carried outside the camp, and Jesus was carried outside the gate of Jerusalem. Isn't that interesting? This legitimizes the idea of going into Leviticus and looking for these types of things.
Did you just hear that? Let's go to Hebrews chapter 13. Hebrews chapter 13 is directly related right here, and this context being talked about is like right towards the end of the 13th year of tribulation, right to the end of the 6th trumpet. The end of the second woe time frame is at hand, and look at the context of what he's talking about. He says, for the bodies of those beasts whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest for sin are burned without the camp. So they're burned outside of the camp, right? They're burned outside of the walls. Okay? Let's keep going. What do we know about this Yeshua Messiah, who is the great sacrifice for all, what does he do? Right? Here it is. Let's go back to that. Verse 11, 12, and 13. That was a little bit too far. Right here. Hebrews 11, 12, and even part of 13. Listen to this. Okay? Oh, so yeah, we did cover that actually. For a sin burned without the camp. Verse 12. Wherefore, Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered without the gate. Let us go forth therefore unto him without the camp, bearing his reproach. Right here, at the end of the 13th chapter, towards the end of the 13th chapter, related to the end time frame of the 13th year of trumpets, we have the typology of Christ being explained, having been brought outside of the camp for the sacrifice of sin. Did we not say, as this was getting going, that Christ was going to be doing something again that was given to us in Hebrews chapter 6? That there was a group of people who were given of these goodly gifts and these heavenly gifts, tasted the things of heaven. Do you understand that this group in Revelation chapter 14 are sealed with the Father's name written on their foreheads? It says that they're standing before the throne. You see? Verse 15, Revelation 14, verse 5. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. This is all about the 144,000 having received this power and this authority, especially when Satan was cast down and Messiah was cut off, and a war was breaking out for 2.5 years during Satan's power and the Antichrist back and the pit open and everything else. There are the two witnesses. And the two witnesses, what's going to happen? The two witnesses are in a battle against the enemy for 2.5 years. You see, who were the two witnesses in Zechariah? The two witnesses in Zechariah were told are Joshua, the high priest and king, and the one whose name is the branch, who is Zerubbabel, who's overseeing the rebuilding. So when the battle breaks out, when their time and their testimony and the things they've done is over, Messiah is cut off, as we've read everywhere. Who does he have to take the strike for as the high priest and king? For the priestly line. Somebody within the priestly line is going to fall, and that typology is the man of sin that we see. But we see it's not going to be that same type. The beast is going to hell, all right? He's going to the pit. Is going to the lake of fire. But what we're seeing here is that in the 13th chapter, you see, it could have talked about this anywhere in the book of Hebrews. But it just so happens that it's in the end relation to the 13th chapter, which is the end of the 13th year. And when we go to the book of Revelation, look at what we see at the end of the 6th trumpet, which is the end of the 6 years. What do we see? The two witnesses after the war which was taking place. This war is a war that lasts for 2.5 years. Nobody gets that. It lasts for 2.5 years. How do you know? Because it begins at the 5th trumpet and it ends at the end of the 6th trumpet. And that period of time from the cutting off is Daniel 12:4, the times and a half, which is 2.5 years, because there's no and between time and times. Okay? Or between times, there's no and. So the two witnesses are killed. The two witnesses are killed, and then what happens? They stand up, they go to heaven, there's a great earthquake, everybody freaks out, and then what happens? Bam! The 7th trumpet sounds, and the Lord returns now, feet down on the Mount of Olives. Who did Christ have to die for in the second strike? He had to die for the priestly line who was responsible for the second strike. Did you see that those who went in at the end of seals, and at the very end of seals was the house of Israel and the house of Judah? The Levitical line is a separate line. Something happens to one or a group of them, that they get very pig-headed or boastful or something happens. And we've seen that that connection is also related to Matthew 24, towards the end of Matthew 24, which is towards the end of the 6th year of trumpets. And they started saying, where is the promise of his coming? And they start beating other servants. Who are the other servants? The other workers. You see, it's absolutely incredible. The timing and the revelation found within Hebrews in the typology of the is to come is clearly revealed, and we've been able to do it by overlapping a brother who understands it from the is and the was. And we have overlapped it already, knowing it in advance by the chapters to years and overlapping it to understand the revelation of the is to come. It is incredible. Let's bring this to a close.
And that's my goal, is to inspire you in your own studies, not just to teach you everything about this, because I couldn't anyways. Chapter 13, verse 13, it says, therefore, let us go to him outside the camp and bear the reproach he endured. And that reproach is the reproach of the cross. So we're like to follow along. We go outside the camp.
You see? We go outside of the camp. We have to go. So at that point, they could go outside of the camp because what? Didn't it just say what the word meant in 6 that he would have to do for this group, whoever falls away, who is sealed by God, who have tasted of all these things? He would have to, again, to renew them back, because he has to. To renew them back would mean he would have to do something afresh. And what does it mean? To re-crucify. When would he be re-crucified? When the time of when he would be killed after the 2.5 years as one of the 2 witnesses. And that's why it said in verse 13, wherefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered without the gate. And they say, let us go forth, therefore, unto him without the camp, bearing his reproach. Because why? He's going to have to be re-crucified for somebody, some portion of that group of the 144. Now, as we bring this to a close, 1:10:55-ish. All right, let's close this out.
Jerusalem. It comes down out of heaven that we read about in Revelation. So I had made a list, but because I thought it would be really helpful at the very end to just run through all the things that were typological related to Christ that we just get from the book of Hebrews. But again, I did not print my list in because I'm kind of a dummy. But to just run out a few off the top of my head, right? And you can help me with this, right? Christ is pictured in the tabernacle itself, according to this book. The details of the tabernacle, like the veil being torn, being his flesh. The sacrifices are picturing Christ. The details about certain sacrifices, like the sin offering being brought outside the camp, that symbolizes Christ brought outside the camp. The high priest himself being chosen among men, one little line in the middle of Exodus, that's representative of Christ being chosen from among man. The activity of the high priest going to God on behalf of the people, Jesus does this, but he does it better. He trumps it. He fulfills it. They constantly fall short. Then we have like things in Hebrews 11 about the individuals of like Moses and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Deborah and Barak. And you go through the list of the names, you have tons of types of Christ. Jerusalem itself is typological to something that relates to Christ. All these things. Did I miss something? I probably missed about 12 things. The point here is this. Hebrews legitimizes looking for Jesus in the Old Testament, and it's something that, in my opinion, we have forgotten about. In a lot of our churches, we're just not really doing this very much. And I would encourage students of the Word to be reading the Old Testament, looking for typology of Christ, only holding on to those types as strongly as the text justifies, right? But looking for those things, knowing how pervasive it is throughout the Scriptures. Let's pray.
See that? You see, guys, what he just said is precisely what we do here. However, as you've just seen, we've been able to do it with these end-time eyes. We do it in the revelation of the is to come. And this brother was the evidence of seeing the typology of Christ in the is and the was. And we just overlaid the entire story, revealing the is to come. As he was saying, he forgot his paper, and there were these things that they just showed in that he just showed in the typologies. We just took it to the next level, the final level, to be able to show his reference as the Melchizedek type, the typology at the end of seals and becoming the Melchizedek, and knowing that somebody's going to fall away and the rebuilding of the temple is going to take place. And when it does, it's going to be a new covenant because it's the house of Israel and the house of Judah and the time frame of it. So he goes to Psalms 110. He goes to Jeremiah 31, both of which are greater future prophetic prophecies than they were for when Christ came and fulfilled it. because the Jews haven't yet been brought in fully because they've been blinded for us. They're not going to come in until they recognize the Messiah who's going to destroy their enemies and be involved with the timing of the rebuilding of the temple. That is how they will know that the Messiah is here, in which is why the house of Judah then goes in at that point. We know he's going to die again, and he's going to do it for a specific group related to the second strike. It is why Matthew said after 3 days and 3 nights. Jesus was not in the grave yet for 3 days and 3 nights. He was only in the grave for about a day and a half. You see, it was 3 days and 3 nights, Matthew said. In the Jonah story, it wasn't fulfilled yet, just like the 40 days of the Son of Man at the beginning are not fulfilled yet, and I just showed you that at the beginning of the video. The only place we have a revelation of after 3 days and 3 nights is when the 2 witnesses are killed, and it's 3 days and a half. It's 3 days and 3 nights and a half. Why? Because Christ isn't going to resurrect in the night portion. He's going to resurrect in the morning portion. It'll be after 3 days and after 3 nights, which makes it at some point on the 4th day. And we just saw that it is Joshua, the high priest and king Yeshua, the son of noon. Told you guys, this stuff is awesome. It is so awesome. So did you see that as we take it all back and it comes to an end? What you've just witnessed is him showing the has been and the is done. And he's showing how the is done is pictured in these excerpts of scripture from the has been. We've taken the has been and the is done and shown that both give us the revelation of the shall be done. Man, I'm so excited. I love being able to share this with you guys. I would love to have had the whole world, everybody in the church, wake up and hear and see and understand these revelations. But we also know something very well here as well. That the Lord God's harvest doesn't happen all at once. It is a 10% first fruits. It is a main harvest, great multitude of the main portion of harvest, and then the corners and gleaning. That is the overall picture of the pre, the mid, the post, the Luke, the Mark, the Matthew. If the whole world knew this, then their Lord's harvest model would be completely null and void. Brothers and sisters, I believe we are absolutely being prepared. Not saying every one of us here in this ministry, but I believe that a good portion of us here are absolutely being prepared. And prepared as 14ers. And our preparation high watch time is the 8th, the 15th, and the 14th. The 28th or the 28th of May, the 4th of June, or the 14th of June. They are all the extreme high watch of whichever one to the Lord God Father truly is the Feast of Weeks. And as much as I lean heavily towards the 8th for John's portion before the Son of Man, which is to the 7th to the 8th day later, I cannot help but see the connections from June 4th into June 5th, when we even know, as we spoke about tonight, it will begin with that short attack. And the anniversary on the Gregorian calendar for a short attack in Israel, that starts it after the escape on the beginning of 50 days, is June 5th. And when it's over, it's the 27th of Av, the 7th of Av, when the 50th day is over and the next attack begins that destroys them and removes them from the land. Brothers and sisters, it is one of these, and if we are to understand that it's 10 days off because the moon comes out too early, then it will be the 14th of June. How do we know this? We have proven it. It is right here. This link is in the description box. You can find it. It is the Sabbath year, Shemitah year counts. It is all in order from the birth of Christ, fully completely understood. The end of 70 to Israel in the count of Leviticus, and the end of 70 to Jerusalem to Daniel 9's count. Brothers and sisters, there are 14 years between the two 70s ending. We are here. It is the Feast of Weeks of the first fruits of the wheat harvest. God bless you. God bless your families. I love you all, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Don't forget, go check out the website, and if you can support us, please do. I know they're in need right now. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.